answer from European capitals has been as resounding as it is clear. We are in an era of rearmament to respond to the short-term urgency to act and to support Ukraine, but also to address the long-term need to take on more responsibility for our own European security.
On Saturday, we also agreed a new £2.2 billion loan for Ukraine, backed not by the British taxpayer, but by the profits from frozen Russian assets. It is my pleasure to bring from His Majesty the King a letter. He sends his best wishes and his regards, of course, but he also asked me to bear this letter and bring it to you. So can I present the letter from the King to you?
Thank you very much. Am I supposed to read it right now?
Yeah, please do.
I will do.
I've got to tell him what your reaction is, so I need to know. I need to know.
He is a great gentleman. A great, great gentleman. He said he thinks the war's going to go on for a long time, and he better not be right. Well, I just think he should be more appreciative, because this country has stuck with them through thick and thin. We've given them much more than Europe, and Europe should have given more than us, because as you know, that's right there, that's the border.
What kind of diplomacy, JD, you are speaking about? What do you mean?
I'm talking about the kind of diplomacy that's going to end the destruction of your country.
Yes, but if you are not
Mr. President, with respect, I think it's disrespectful for you to come into the Oval Office and try to litigate this in front of the American media.
You're gambling with the lives of millions of people. You're gambling with World War III. You're gambling with World War III.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
A very, very good morning to you. Welcome to the show. I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer. This is Talk, the home of common sense. And whether you are listening on DAB Plus radio, listening on your smart speaker, watching on YouTube or watching on your connected device, thank you so much for joining us. You know perfectly well what we're going to be talking mostly about today. Of course, it is the spring statement. This is after the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, has been branded delusional. I mean, by pretty much everybody, after she insisted that her economic plans are working, as official growth forecasts were halved to just 1%. And by the way, it may even be worse than that. And the Office for Budget Responsibility kind of oversee all the official figures, warned that Brits face further tax rises. She, of course, won't rule it out. I think we can all expect that it will happen in the autumn. Question is, will Rachel Reeves actually still be in a job after that point? She also was forced to deliver a £14 billion package of emergency spending cuts in yesterday's spring statement to avoid breaking her own fiscal rules. However, many people will say that simply doesn't go far enough, and especially when you get, little blips in the world economic world, when things like Donald Trump announces a world car industry 25% tariff on all vehicles imported to the US, dealing a blow to UK car manufacturers. Plus, we're going to talk about the Sentencing Council drafting new guidelines on immigration offences that would allow hundreds of illegal migrants who commit crimes to avoid deportation each year. I mean, not many of them get deported anyway, but this is going to make it worse. It's all part of that two-tier justice, which means that if you're of an ethnic minority, from a minority culture, there must be some sort of report done on your background before any sentencing, which nearly always means, oh, here are some mitigating circumstances why this person shouldn't be deported. We'll talk about all of that, plenty more besides. Joining me for all the chat today, I'm delighted to say, is Philip Ingram, MBE, former senior military intelligence officer. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good morning.
I mean, there's quite a lot of stuff going on in terms of White House, Signal and everything. Would have loved to have had you in the studio on the day that story broke, certainly. But look, neither of us is an economist. I on a technicality, have an economics degree, rather worryingly. I worry that I know more about economics than the Chancellor. This is a concern to me because I'm really not very good at economics. My father would certainly agree. But I can manage my budget.
Yeah.
I understand the concept of money going in, money going out, net and gross. And also, you know, living with a man who runs his own business, you know, having lots of friends who run their own businesses, talking to people over the years through my job as a journalist and as friends and colleagues about how, you know, how businesses are run and how decisions are made. It occurs to me that Rachel Reeves has none of this in her life and has existed in some weird, rarefied, I don't know, complaints department at Halifax Bank of Scotland, or for 5 years, not 10 years, at the Bank of England as an economist, where she's totally and utterly unaware of the real world and how most working people, how most people who aren't working on welfare, and how most business people make decisions about their finances and their day. Everything that was announced yesterday kind of doesn't really deliver what we need, which is growth. We had £40 billion in tax rises and 25 billion of that taxes, direct tax on jobs, national insurance, employer contributions announced in the autumn. That meant that growth was going down. She says she's going to be delivering more growth with house building, even though no one thinks she's going to build the number of houses she says she's going to build. We haven't got the people to build the houses. She thinks that some of the welfare cuts is going to be enough to deliver, you know, and tackling tax evasion and government efficiency is going to tackle the massive hole in our government finances. Doesn't even touch the sides of it, and she seems to just have this wonderful. I mean, rose-tinted glasses doesn't do justice to this, and to view that everything's going to be fine at the end of this term in office. I don't think there's anyone who thinks that is true, whether on the left or the right.
No, not at all. Well, she's got a theoretical approach to economics, and that's why she's attacking the one thing that can bring growth, and that's business. You know, if you don't enable businesses to employ more people, to expand and to grow, then you're not going to get more tax receipts in. It's going to cost you more money in the welfare state. And you look at the housing. The housing minister, Angela Rayner, the deputy prime minister, turned around and said 5 out of 7 of the houses that they're going to build are for the illegal asylum seekers that are coming in.
Well, the numbers are simply,
they're
going to have priority.
Yeah, the numbers just don't add up. And then if we go back to the manifesto, how many years ago? Oh, it was only a few months ago that they were putting that out. Labour based their whole plan for this Parliament on a 2 to 2.5% growth.
Yeah.
She said yesterday, not one of those statistics that came out of the OBR got even to 2% growth. No. So she's not going to achieve any of the plans.
And we know that forecasts are always wrong because they've always been wrong. Yeah. And the forecasts are particularly wrong when they're more than a few months out. Yeah. I mean, even when they get the figures, by the way, they nearly always have to revise them. Even for the last 3 months, they have to revise them in 6 months' time because they haven't got the full figures. Even when they've got the figures, they're wrong. But there's no reason to think that anything she is doing and anything the government is doing generally is going to lead to greater growth, higher growth in years to come. Other than the house building, but even with the house building, this plan for 1.5 million new homes, as you say, most of those are going to go to foreign arrivals. It's predicated that no one, the actual figures suggest actually you're looking at 1.2 million. But again, if they're not all going to new immigrants, everything is predicated on, absurdly, 300,000 arrivals per year on average, of net arrivals per year for immigration. Well, that's well below half what we are currently seeing. So I'm sorry, that's not true either. So there's not going to be a clampdown on that. That's not in Labour's, Tories didn't do it, it's certainly not in Labour's DNA to do it. So everything that they've predicated on, and Nigel Farage was right when he spoke yesterday, and he pointed out, people talk about GDP going up. It's not going to go up very much, even if it does go up. But even if GDP does go up, it won't be going up per capita, per head of the population. If you import a load more people and it goes up a tiny bit, actually, we end up on average poorer.
She's brought in one thing that is a tiny green shoot towards growth, and it's something that I and Ted, our producer, have been talking about since long before the election, and it's the expenditure in defence. Yeah. And using increased defence expenditure to underpin growth, because you tend to spend your defence money on homegrown industries.
And it's capital investment, a lot of it.
It's capital investment.
Here's the thing,
and everything
though,
else.
It's not enough money.
Correct.
And it's about 2 billion extra, but even a lot of that extra money, it's not enough to actually defend us from this defence industry complex. It's not going to do that, because actually some of that money is going to go on refurbishing the homes of military personnel.
Exactly.
Now that's worthwhile doing and helping the retention for military personnel, but that doesn't actually help us fight Russia.
Well, exactly, and it's very last minute, because only a couple of weeks ago, again, Ted and I were quite naughty. We asked the Minister of Defence what they were doing with the Strategic Defence Review, if they were going to go above 2.5%, and they came back quite clearly to us and said, no, we're not. There's no plans for that whatsoever. All of a sudden, she's stolen our idea. I think that I see that as a positive.
They were never going to do it otherwise. But the point is, again, we live in an uncertain world. Now, she was able to restore her fiscal headroom. Now, we've got the Labour MPs bleating from the back saying, what about the poor, what about the most vulnerable? A perfectly reasonable concern, which everyone should have. And saying, look, this fiscal headroom thing, it's a made-up rule, it's your own rule, you can break that rule. Germany's doing it to they have a constitutional change to change the rules so they can spend some more on defence. But that's a particular issue there, and defence spending is very different from other kinds of spending in terms of the need for it. People always say we've got enough money to fight wars. Well, yeah, because it's a different kind of thing.
We don't want to fight them. We want to stop fighting them.
Exactly,
that's why we need to spend
that's why you need the deterrent. But even 9.9 billion. I mean, she's gone from 9.93 billion. She lost that with various changes. Interest rates not coming down quick enough, so our extra money we're spending on paying the interest on the debt we've already got, 100 billion a year just going on interest right now. It changes, the world markets as a result of Trump's election and what's going on with Ukraine and the like. She's now replaced that with exactly 9.93 fiscal headroom again, which is all very well, except in the big scheme of things, in terms of a government budget of 1.3 trillion pounds. I mean, that's nothing. It's nothing. It's the equivalent of me saying, well, there's a forecast for a tornado. That's terrible, but don't worry, I've got 25 quid in my back pocket. So I'm covered myself there. This is fiscal headroom is basically rainy day money. It's when you have savings, and by the way, at least a third of the people in this country have zero in savings, and I think another third have under £3,000. Huge numbers of people in this country have no rainy day money, but we need the government to have it, because otherwise we face a lot of problems. But if you don't have that money, rainy day money, literally, when stuff happens, like, I don't know, the US president's announced a 25% tariff on all car imports, including those from Britain's, Range Rover and everyone else.
And Aston Martins, and that is Rachel Reeves makes her statement at 12:30. Then Donald Trump at 4:00 in the afternoon makes a 25% increase in not just car tariffs, but it's pharmaceuticals as well. Two of the biggest exports that we have to the United States, and that takes away her headroom. Full stop.
Yeah, I mean, and that is the biggest problem, isn't it? That's kind of already gone. What did you make about the? I mean, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. By the way, I should bring you into the conversation here. Rachel is accused of balancing the books on the backs of the poor by the left, but she won't rule out more tax rises on working people. She's got a budget, a proper budget, not just this emergency budget coming up this autumn. Assuming she's still in the job, I think they'll let her do another one.
I think they will
take all the hit, and then she'll be quietly ousted. But I want to know your reaction to the spring budget statement. Whether you're someone on benefits yourself, whether you're worried, whether you are running a business, whether you are just trying to make ends meet. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Give us a call, 0344 499 1000. Text the word talk in your message to 87222. Get in touch with us on X at talkTV. Calls, of course, are charged at the national rate. Text costs £1, standard network rate message. Of course, it's free to leave a message on YouTube and on X as well. There are legitimate conversations to have about welfare reform. I mean, the main thing I have with the left is the left will immediately go, oh, God, you shouldn't cut benefits, the most vulnerable, the backs of the poor. I don't want a freeze on benefits for people who are claiming disability benefits, PIP or any other, or the health element of your personal independence payment. I mean, these are very complicated benefits. I mean, I can't make head nor tail of a lot of them. I certainly think most people trying to claim them are absolutely befuddled by it and have to go to organisations like Citizens Advice to get help to claim, what they need. But the OBR, the Office of Budget Responsibility, they estimate that the welfare cuts announced yesterday would plunge 250,000 people into poverty. That's including 50,000 children. Now, the argument from Rachel Reeves and her number two, Darren Jones, Chief Secretary of the Treasury, who's also in the Cabinet, is that, well, that's not true. They're not taking into account these people will lose benefits, these families will lose benefits, but that's because they'll be getting into work. We'll be helping them into work. Now, if we haven't got growth, there are not going to be that many jobs for a start. But even then, question mark is whether they are actually going to go and get those jobs. I thought it was particularly poor idea of Darren Jones to liken, if someone loses a benefits case, it's like me giving, halving, taking £10 off my son's pocket money. By the way, how much pocket money do you give your son, mate? Taking £10 off and then saying, so he's £10 poorer, but that's because I want him to go and get a Saturday job. Now, Rachel Reeves has said, that wasn't perhaps the right language. Yeah, it was crass. And again, it shows this abject lack of thought that goes into these things by this government. I'm not all about the communications, but you've got to understand how that is going to be seen by people. If you are seriously disabled and you seriously need your welfare benefits, and we as a civilised country should absolutely be supporting you and helping you as we see fit, to liken that to a teenager getting pocket money, being told, go and get a job, go and get a Saturday job washing up, it is an insult. It is an insult and it's crass. But you can understand why a lot of people are concerned, like the freezing of benefits for people who need them. What we want, surely, is to have fewer people on those benefits who don't need them. Yeah. What we want is the people who don't really need them, people who are swinging the lead, and yes, there are lots of them.
There are lots of them.
I mean, again, reality, Rachel Reeves. If you don't think there are, you're living in cloud cuckoo land. But also the people who could be working and have persuaded themselves that they can't work, but would be better off working, and we'd certainly be better off for them working. We want those people not to be claiming benefits, not for the people who need benefits to lose money.
Yeah. Well, community conscription, I think we should bring in anyone who's in benefits. They should be marched off to
welfare.
To welfare to put work out into the community, and that would make people want to go and actually work for.
You're going to have to turn up every day in your high-vis jacket, cleaning graffiti, cleaning the streets. Again, I don't know why. I don't know why have anxiety or depression would stop you being able to clean graffiti off a tube train. I genuinely don't see why that would stop you doing it.
But again, there's so many other things going on. Optics. You say about the comparison with pocket money. Optics. The same week that Rachel Reeves had declared that she took concert tickets for a family member for something that she didn't particularly like, worth hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pounds. Whenever people that are on benefits can't even potentially afford to watch the concert on television because they can't afford the television subscriptions.
Yeah,
those that swing,
funnily enough, people do.
Those that swing the lead can, and they get the brand new TV and they get everything else. But those that are genuinely suffering, and some of them will suffer in these cuts, and they're the ones that it's going to hit in a very cruel way.
Absolutely.
The optics are bad, the reality is bad, and her not looking at growth in business is bad because she's not going to create the jobs. And we're already seeing major supermarkets closing their cafes and closing their small shops and various other things.
I look at my local high street and there's plenty of money around my way, and a lovely leafy street, very lucky, and there are so many boarded up shops.
Yes.
It's the fact that the Poundland went out of business. That's the giveaway.
And we haven't had the shock that's going to come in at the beginning of next month. So next week, that's going to hit with all the other things.
So the national insurance rises, the council tax rises, bills are all going up, everything is going... inflation, we're looking at like 3.8%. OK, it's not 11%. It's still more than it should be. But that hasn't even hit yet.
Yes.
And we're already... Just finally, before we go to a break, we're going to talk to independent economist Julian Jessup. I do want to also just bring in what Zelensky's had to say. He was meeting with Emmanuel Macron. I'm still convinced the reason Emmanuel Macron wants to have all these meetings is he's the only other world leader who's shorter than him. I swear he is such a prima donna. I'm sure that's part of it.
Ego's such a big word.
Absolutely, yeah. It's taller than him. But interesting, there's President Zelensky doing some interviews. He does sit down and interview with people like the BBC's Jeremy Bowen. I did think, when I first saw that, I thought, good God, hasn't the man suffered enough? I mean, it's bad enough you're being bombed in your own government, then you have to talk to Jeremy Bowen.
Yes.
But Zelensky did say, look, Putin will die soon, and that's a fact. Basically, with long-standing ill health rumours about Vladimir Putin. He seems to vary in terms of when you look at him, he can seem to move one of his arms or not, and whether he can appear for certain things. But he's making the point, look, I'm a young man, he's an old man. He's in his 70s now.
Yeah.
Basically, he just needs Europe to hold out as long as Putin. Yeah. But that's assuming that the person who comes along after Putin is better.
Yeah, well, and the chances are they're not. But I think some of the sub-editors that have written the headlines have been slightly bad. Zelensky, because I watched the interview with Jeremy Bowen, Zelensky was quite clear. I'm the younger man than Putin, so I've got greater chance of longevity, so bet on me. Putin's an old man and he is going to die soon. Not because of some illness or anything else, because he's just older.
It's an age. Age point, yes. He's making simple facts, We should bring some of those into a budget or a spring statement. Anyway, 10:19 is now. I want to hear from you. 0344 499 1000. Up next, we're going to talk to economist Julian Jessup about what he makes of what Rachel Reeves had to say yesterday. And is it all going to be as lovely and fine and dandy and rose-tinted as she seems to think? think? I have a funny feeling I already know his answer to that. This is Talk, the home of common sense.
You've got a Chancellor that is not an economist. I don't think she knows much about numbers. She's totally reliant on the Office for Budget Responsibility and their delusional forecast. Nothing short of delusional. On the one hand, they've halved their growth forecast for 2025 from what they forecast just a few months ago, saying that the world has changed and it's all much more difficult geopolitically. And yet, magically, as though maybe they've been eating magic mushrooms, they've suddenly increased their growth forecasts every year thereafter.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the home of common sense, with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. Thanks so much for joining us. Philip Ingram's still here, and delighted to be joined now by independent economist Julian Jessup as well. A very good morning to you, Julian.
Good morning.
Thank you for joining us. Well, I mean, it's absolutely fascinating today looking at the front pages and across the board from left to right, whether it's the Mirror or the Guardian or the Mail, Telegraph, Times and the Sun and others. Really not very happy with Rachel Reeves. From her backbenchers to many of her cabinet colleagues, I suspect, she has not done the job with her spring statement. What is your big takeaway from what she had to say?
Well, I think it could have been worse, actually. I think she...
There you go. That's the best you can say. It could have been worse.
The best I could do, yeah. She didn't, for example, relax her fiscal rules, as some people have been arguing for, in order to borrow more for defence or welfare, which would have pushed up borrowing costs. She also resisted pressure to raise taxes again, and in particular to impose a wealth tax that would have backfired by depressing investment and driving more taxpayers overseas. So it could have been worse. She did make some reasonably important savings on the welfare bill and efficiency savings elsewhere in the public sector. So as I say, it could have been worse. But the reality is still that things have deteriorated since the Labour government took power. So we had that budget back in October that included a massive increase in the tax bill, including on working families through raising employers' national insurance. And also, while she is, lightening regulations in some areas, things like planning reforms and financial services, she's tightening regulations in others, particularly in the labour market with the so-called Employment Rights Bill and everything that's happening on net zero. So it's far from clear to me that she is fixing the foundations of the economy. If anything, she's undermining the foundations of the private sector, which ultimately is the key driver of growth and job creation.
And this is the thing, the people who are criticising her, certainly from her own party, are largely criticising her, say, from the wrong line. They don't think there should be any welfare cuts. They think there should be more worker rights. There should be higher taxes. I mean, just the constant cry on the benches yesterday of like, oh, tax the wealthy, tax the wealthy. We already do that. And proof is in the pudding. Every country that has tried to tax the wealthy more, especially this sort of idea of this sort of 1% one-off wealth tax once a year, or even just one-off. We know what happens when people try that. The wealthy leave and they don't pay any tax here at all.
That's absolutely right. We've got what I might call left-wing celebrities and social media stars at the moment banging on about the need to tax the rich and impose a wealth tax. But as you say, we do tax the rich. And when you actually ask them for details of what this wealth tax would actually be, they clearly don't have an idea. I mean, they don't have any idea about economics or even how the tax system works at the moment. So, I'm happily going to debate with anybody who thinks a wealth tax is a good idea.
I always love the very rich celebrities who call for it and said they'd happily pay more. And I mean, well, free to. I mean, it's easy. You can go onto the HMRC website and you can offer to pay more any time. Thank you very much for your lovely offer. Funnily enough, not many of them actually do. But in terms of the welfare cuts, the reality of a lot of this is it doesn't kick in for a few years. She's talking about freezing some of the benefits that people get who are in need, who are on these benefits, and cutting it basically, therefore, a cut below inflation. And at the same time, talking about limiting the number of people who can go on to benefits. But the reality is they've got no way of knowing whether they will be able to actually limit. By changing it to you have to have 4 points on this particular score, or changing it from having a number of points totaling from various different things like can you get dressed on your own, can you walk a certain distance and the like. People have been able to fiddle this anyway, whether deliberately or just convincing themselves that they can't do these things. We have 1 million more people claiming these sorts of benefits than we did before the pandemic, way more, catastrophically more than any other Western nation. We've got people who are claiming to have, autism, ADHD, depression, anxiety, you name it, unable due to a mental health issue to be able to work. There's nothing in her reforms that is going to guarantee we're going to get those people off benefits, is there?
Well, I mean, starting with the big picture, a lot of people from the left in particular are accusing her of reintroducing austerity. I mean, that's clearly nonsense. Government spending is still going to increase massively over the next few years, including on welfare. The overall welfare bill is still going to rise, just by slightly less than it would otherwise have done. In terms of the detail of the welfare cuts, I think I'm in favour of most of them. I don't think withdrawing benefits from people who don't really need them counts as austerity. And indeed, I don't think paying people benefits that they don't need is actually good for them either. No. I think it'd be much better to support them into work and to provide support in other ways for those.
But there's no evidence that we are going to support these people into work. And I was speaking to someone who works at a benefits office yesterday, off air, pointing out that people don't lose their personal dependence payments until they are reassessed, even if they've been doing some work and they could be assessed that actually you don't need this anymore. You don't lose it until you are reassessed. And she says they are 2 years behind on reassessment appointments.
Well, I do have some concerns about the detail here. I mean, it's interesting. The Chancellor is obsessed with this figure of 9.9 billion for the
fiscal headroom.
9.9 billion, not 10 billion or 9.8 billion.
It's 9.93 billion.
Oh, even more accurate. And that's based on a 5-year forecast from the Office of Budget Responsibility that I think even the Office of Budget Responsibility would admit would almost certainly be wrong.
Yeah.
And what's happened in the last few days is she's had to scramble around to find a few extra 100 million of savings from the welfare budget in order to meet that entirely artificial target. And I know I'm not an expert on the benefit system, but I think it's very unlikely that if you're scrambling around at the last minute to find savings, you've done so in the most efficient and fairest way. So I wouldn't be surprised if some genuinely vulnerable people will slip through the net as a result of this. And that's down to her.
And that's going to be the real worry, isn't it? She did say, though, look, things are difficult. They're going to get better. We know that the forecasts, I mean, the terrible downgrading of the growth forecast for this year from 2% to 1%, halving. but growth rising up through the rest of the term in office, although not reaching the 2.5% that is needed for all the government plans that they announced before the election. She says, though, look, they're fixing the foundations. They fix the foundations. They plan to build more houses, free up planning and things like that. Is that going to be enough?
No, I mean, to be fair, she is doing some positive things. I do think the new fiscal rules are sensible. I genuinely approve of the increase in public investment. I think the planning reforms are good, and deregulation of other sectors as well. So there are some things she's doing on what economists call the supply side of the economy. But I also think that's more than offset by other things she's doing. So the increase in taxes, I mean, she's, even if you think taxes should have gone up, she's raised the wrong taxes. Yeah. The taxes on jobs, stamp duty and so on. And also she's increasing regulation in other areas, including the labour market and all the net zero stuff on top of that. So it's sort of 2 steps forward, but I'd argue at least 3 steps back. And in the meantime, growth is suffering. There was that big downgrade in growth, partly due to global headwinds, but mainly due to measures the new government itself has taken.
Yeah, and so when she says, and we heard this was what we were discussing on the show yesterday, that you know things happen in the global markets. We're not in control of that. Ukraine. They didn't say Donald Trump, but wink, wink, it's Donald Trump. But the reality is none of that's going away. And £9.93 billion of fiscal headroom, or £10 billion of fiscal headroom, is neither here nor there for dealing with the sort of unforeseen circumstances, like the unforeseen circumstances of things like, a COVID pandemic, lockdown, furlough, Ukraine being invaded. What about Taiwan being invaded? I mean, there are lots of unforeseen things that could happen, and we've got a spare £9.93 billion to deal with it all.
Yeah, I mean, as people say, stuff happens, and I think any stuff.
I think it's a different word they use, but thank you for your choice of words, sir.
Yeah, but I think the stuff that's likely to happen between now and the autumn budget is more likely to be bad stuff than good stuff. So I think there's a very high chance that she'll have to come back again in the autumn and raise taxes further. And the government has already floated various ideas for how they might do this. For example, extending the freeze on personal tax allowances, which is the stealth tax that drags more people into paying higher rates. I think there are lots of other things you might do on things like fuel duty and other measures as well that will raise the tax burden. I think that is why we might sigh a small sigh of relief yesterday that taxes haven't gone up. But I think it's almost inevitable they will at some point soon.
Yeah, it's another one of those happy Thursdays. Julia Jessup, independent economist, thank you very much indeed for that analysis. Philip Ingram, I mean, I think it's really important that we do give credit where it's due for the good things. And I don't like, whether it's, in American politics or British politics, this sort of everything this person does is wrong. They're a bad person. I've written articles saying, like, praising, Angela Rayner and Rachel Reeves on the plan for house building and dealing with the planning issue. And they're going to say they're going to build nuclear reactors. Well, get on with it. I'm all in favour of that. But when she says she's fixing the foundations, I think a lot of people would genuinely pay attention if it was explained to them properly. We're going to have to raise taxes. We're going to have to build a lot of stuff so that we can. It's going to cost more to train people up to get them so that they can be the brickies of the future, the scaffolders of the future, who are going to help build these homes. We're going to get them off benefits. We're going to do all that. There is a cost to that. The universal credit changes cost more. They didn't save money. Ian Duxbury was very clear. They're not going to save money in the early years. It's a long-term thing. Training people up, the carrot costs more than the stick of just removing those benefits. But they're not really doing that properly anyway. And if as we were saying earlier, if you're going to import a whole load of new people to the country, those jobs are not going to be going to the people who are currently on the dole or on benefits of any sort. Those houses you're building are not going to go to them either. And so you're kind of back to square one again.
Well, and there's lots of areas where she could look at novel tax regimes to increase the revenue that's coming in. That's not going to hit the average person in the street and all the rest of it. A quick example is gambling. 2021-22, gambling made a total gambling revenue guide of £14.1 billion. A percentage of tax on that, and that's just one area. There's lots of areas around the place that you can hit.
To be fair, if we didn't have betting shops and things on the high street and charity shops, there'd be nothing left in the high street, indeed. Exactly. There are other things we need to tax, but again, I'm not sure that, as a general rule, that basing everything on just more and more and more tax. If more and more and more tax delivered a better economy, we would be flying by now, and we are not.
Yeah, I'll give her another big tick. Again, what she said in in defence and spending more money, she is then creating a new body to try and make defence expenditure more efficient. And that is one area that has to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, all of it needs to be more efficient, but there we are. I'd like a bit more Doge territory on that. It's now 10:34. Time now to find out how you could be in with a chance of winning Oasis tickets at Wembley this summer, plus £10,000.
How do you fancy winning tickets to the hottest gig of the century? Here at Talk, we're giving you the chance to bag yourself a pair of tickets to Oasis at Wembley this summer. Plus, we're giving away a whopping 10 grand and putting you up for the weekend in a London hotel. All you need to do is text the word prize to 83338 and you're in the draw. Alternatively, you can enter by post. Once again, all you need to do is text the word prize to 83338 or you can enter by post. Good luck.
18 plus UK excluding Northern Ireland. Enter by text for £2 plus one standard network charge by 11 p.m. on the 7th of April 2025. Or post your name and number to Oasis Competition, PO Box 3190. Colchester CO2 8GP to arrive by 5 p.m. on the 10th of April 2025. Full terms and conditions at talksport.com.
This is a News Broadcasting Network promotion.
You do not want to miss your chance of winning those tickets at the gig of the decade and, of course, £10,000. Good luck with you on that. 10:35 is the time. Going to take a short break. Then we're going to find out what former Labour Party advisor Matthew Larser makes what the budget was now, well, the spring statement announcements from Rachel Reeves mean. Does he agree, as the Mirror and others seem to think, The Guardian, that she's balancing the books on the backs of the poor? This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the Home of Common Sense. 10:38 is the time. Philip Ingram's still with me. I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer, and we are joined now by former Labour Party advisor Matthew Larser. A very good morning to you, Matthew.
Good morning to you both.
So where are you when it comes to the spring statement yesterday? Do you think this was, failing to fix the foundations, more tax rises coming, an absolute disaster for the economy, or the other criticism, which seems to be coming from the Mirror and the Guardian, which is that this is Rachel Reeves basically balancing the books on the backs of the poor? Because I've yet to find anyone who was happy with what she had to say yesterday.
Well, I think that the real issue here is, in a sense, they're both right, because she has boxed herself in with the OBR, the obsession with the OBR and the obsession with ensuring she has enough headroom, as you were saying a few moments ago, Julia, in 5 years' time, on a forecast that most people think will bear about as much relation to reality as Donald Trump's speeches. So, so I think the real lost opportunity was yesterday was to say, look, we're going to be responsible. We're not going to go crazy on spending, but I'm not going to break the backs, or indeed, as some would say, break the backs of the very poorest in society to balance the books. And in particular, she keeps saying that the life has changed. What's really changed is Donald Trump has changed the whole political universe. But of course, because the government has this very peculiar situation where they won't even say his name, they won't even.
But aren't they being sensible there? I think they're being rather wise, given that you've got this sort of egomaniac in Donald Trump. It's not Trump derangement syndrome. The man doesn't like being criticised. It's not going to serve any purpose for them to say Donald Trump has made this all a problem. It's not going to help Britain, is it?
I think they should be diplomatic, but I think you can't ignore the elephant in the room by even naming the elephant, even if you don't criticise the elephant in the room. And as we've seen with the auto tariffs overnight, unless an exemption is pulled from the hat, Britain is going to be affected, and the silence is not exactly winning it. So we're going to see in the next 6.5 days whether the nicey strategy is going to deliver results. Well,
Rachel Reeves was hinting this morning that there are still conversations going on behind the scenes in the hope that, of course, we don't have this massive balance of trade surplus with the United States as some other countries do. And again, as I pointed out to American commentators, reason people don't buy American cars is they're not very good cars. The reason people want to buy British cars like Range Rovers and Jaguars and the like is because they're very good cars. It's really that simple. I mean, customers ultimately make that decision, but making them sort of $10,000, $20,000 more expensive for Americans to purchase, I'm not sure American consumers are going to be very happy about that. But this is the thing. You say she's boxed herself in, and there's this idea, and a lot of people on the Labour backbench are saying, oh, this is just balancing the books. It's like, well, yeah, because we see what happens when you don't. And it's extraordinary that we do actually have a higher, borrowing commitment. Our cost of servicing our debt is currently higher than it was after Liz Truss's emergency budget in the autumn of 2022. She was ousted from office a few weeks later. Rachel Reeves, I doubt very much is going to last a whole year in office, given how unhappy everyone left and right is with her at the current time. But at the end of the day, it's not her fiscal rules, it's the market's fiscal rules. If they're not happy, if they don't trust what she's doing, they're going to raise the cost of borrowing. We're already spending £100 billion a year just paying the interest on our debt. We can't afford any more.
Well, look, I agree with you, Julia. There is no blank cheque, and those in the Labour Party who think that you can just spend, like a 1970s Paul's winner, are living in cloud cuckoo land. So, in a sense, not only the Labour Party but the country have to wake up to the reality of the fact that there's a limit to what we can spend. However, as you've just said, borrowing costs are fairly high even within these fiscal rules. So I think that, I think that sticking to this slightly artificial target is the issue. Showing responsibility across the piece is important. Let's face it, she wouldn't be waking up to the Mirror and Guardian headlines if it was for the sake of £1 billion. And I don't think £1 billion is going to add much to the borrowing costs. There's jitters on the markets generally about the borrowing costs overall. And I think the issue within the Labour Party on the welfare changes.
Yeah, but the thing is, you know perfectly well, as I do, that the welfare budget is unsustainable. It's going up. Even under this government, it's not austerity, as one of our economists just pointed out, it's not austerity. The government spending is still going up. Government spending on welfare is still going to go up. It's going to continue to go up. There's no real certainty that even these cuts will lead to a cut in the rise in the welfare dependency. That people will actually come off one benefit and not just go on to another benefit rather than getting a job. This has to be tackled. This is just about the reality of the demographics of this country and the number of people we need to be working to support an ageing population.
Look, absolutely, Julia. I agree with you. In a sense, the government does, because it does have a welfare reform plan. I mean, for example, in terms of the personal independence payments, one of the big problems is that since the pandemic, only 2 out of 10 people are seen in person. Yeah. And it was 7 out of 10 10 before. They want to get that back up so that people are.
Well, it should be 10 out of 10, shouldn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
But if you've got a 2-year, as I discovered from my colleague who works, a friend of mine who works in the benefits office, there's a 2-year delay on people being reassessed. I mean, how quickly is that going to kick in? Half the people working for the benefits office don't work in the office anymore. They're working from home and they're refusing to go back in the office.
Yeah, they've got to tackle that, and they've got to make sure that
they don't even tackle it in Whitehall. How are they going to tackle it in the benefits office?
Well, I think in a sense, and if you're going to do a face-to-face assessment, you need to be in place more, even than those civil servants on Fridays working from home. But I think the problem inside the Labour Party on the benefit cuts is actually quite a lot of people in the Labour Party, the majority of people accept welfare reform. They need to get people off welfare into work. We saw a plan 10 days ago, which was meant to be about that. And then suddenly, to meet these fairly artificial targets, she then had to find an extra £1 billion of cuts down the back of the sofa. Yeah. And that's what's pushing people over the edge.
That's what's But the thing is, I think a lot of people recognise in principle, in theory, there should be benefit cuts. But when anyone's benefits are actually cut, they all scream blue murder and say, no, 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 not that person's benefits. Now, I don't want somebody's benefits to be cut in real terms because they're not going up with inflation. If those are benefits that people need, the question is how many people actually need those benefits? That's the key thing. I mean, we're always told, oh, there's very low-level fraud. Well, there's fraud, there's organised gangs claiming benefits they don't really need, and then there are people who are swinging the lead who don't really need it. They don't count as fraudsters, they do to people, taxpayers like me. And then there are people who frankly could be helped to work. Frankly, I think their families should be helping them, their friends should be helping them, the state should be helping them, and there shouldn't be an option of being on benefits because you've got anxiety or depression for the rest of your life. I just don't think that should be an option for the vast majority of those people. But when you actually talk about the specifics, BBC and every other broadcaster wheels out someone else with saying, oh, I can't work, my child can't work, I'm a carer, this or that. Every time it's always, they don't actually interview someone who says, yeah, well, I just don't want to work because I feel a bit anxious when I get on a bus. They don't interview those people, and you get Labour MPs saying, this is awful, this is awful. We don't want to hurt the people who really need the benefits, but I simply don't believe that a huge number of people on the benefits need them.
Look, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. Everybody talks about it in practice as a good thing, but when it comes to their constituents who are moaning or the media, when they find case studies, as you say, they don't like it in practice. And as a country, and that includes the Labour Party, if we want to do things like defence or invest in the health service, we have to make sure that people who can work do work. That's the government's aim. That is the
well, how do we do that? What is the best way of doing that? Because I'm a big fan of workfare, and we know that work's good for you. If you've got depression or anxiety, I don't see why you can't clean graffiti, do something useful, or go and get another job. I think it'd be good to get you out in the fresh air, with other people, doing something useful. I mean, these things are actually rather rewarding to do. People who go pick up litter on beaches and things like that. Why don't we get people doing things like that? It'd be good for them. It'd be good for us.
Well, what we can do is introduce some sanctions, and the benefit system is actually what the Blair Labour government did, particularly with young people. One of the things that Rachel's done is taking away PIP, the personal independence payment, from those between 18 and I think 22. Yeah. So that young people are not being written off right at the beginning of their career, so that they end up with a lifetime on benefit. We need to get people assessed in person so that their needs are actually assessed on an individual basis, and it's not.
But what do you do if someone says, "I'm anxious"? I get anxious when I have to go to work. I'm too depressed. I feel suicidal. That's the key word. The website's advice. If those people say that, whether it's in person or on the phone, if they say that, how can you not give them benefits if that's the tick box exercise you're going through?
Well, you can support them a lot better. For example, there's a great project in Sheffield which has had huge success in people who are on welfare into work, who suddenly got problems. For example, one person had a problem with their back. They worked in a pharmacy. They couldn't stand up all day. Their employer wouldn't let them sit down in a chair. Yep. Instead, the welfare to work, I think it's called Work City Sheffield, something like that. It then negotiated with the employer who was about to get rid of the person, and instead they've got a thing that works for them. So they're not. So everyone's a winner, and that's what it's got to be. It's got to be individualised support, which is why people need to be assessed in person. Okay. To have a work advisor back into work.
Well, we need to get the work advisors back into the office as well first. Well, just finally, very briefly, do you think Rachel Reeves survives in her job to, I don't know, Christmas, to the next election?
I think till Christmas, yes. I think to the next election is more questionable. I think that certainly she's going to have a better news story to tell if she's going to be there by the time we go to the vote.
Very interesting. Matthew Larser, former Labour Party advisor. What do you think, Philip Ingram?
Oh, a number of things in there. What Donald Trump's doing was predictable, and this shows that the Labour Party did no planning whatsoever. Yeah. And then they supported the Democrats. So Trump's team, who are extreme right-wing, will see Keir Starmer's team as the Democrats in the UK, so won't give us any concessions.
Yeah, indeed. But do you think Rachel Reeves survives the year?
No, I don't think so.
Very interesting. 10:48 is time. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Get your calls in 0344 499 1000. Rachel Reeves is accused of balancing the books on the backs of the poor, but she won't rule out more tax rises on working people. So we're all losing out as the economy basically flatlines again. What is your reaction to the spring statement? 0344 499 1000. Your calls up next. This is Talk.
contrasting to how bad all the economic indicators are, where what we saw was that growth has halved compared to forecast, cost of borrowing is up, unemployment is up, so many economic indicators going in the wrong direction, and what that means is bad news for businesses and for people's livelihoods. So it was really disappointing to sit and hear all that, and so much a consequence of the bad decisions that the Chancellor has made since Labour got into power, including their really damaging jobs tax and national insurance rise.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the Home of Common Sense, with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. Philip Ingram still with me. And let's get some of your messages coming in thick and fast about I keep saying budget, but spring statement. It was an emergency budget, really, although thankfully no tax rises. As Julian Jessup, our independent economist, said, it could have been worse. So that's where we are today. It could have been worse. Lenny says, it's embarrassing a Labour Party cutting disability benefits and freezing pensioners to aid the rich and not going after companies with outstanding tax liabilities. Does this aid the rich? The rich pay, what is it? Top 30% of taxes in this country are paid by the top 1%. Yeah. They're paying a lot of taxes. This idea that the rich people aren't paying taxes is just madness.
And they're not paying taxes, they're employing lots of people who are paying taxes.
I still want them to pay taxes. I think people should pay their fair taxes. And yeah, there are all those companies that aren't, those international companies that don't pay, I think, the fair rate of tax. But again, you go after those companies, they disappear. I think all the countries should go together to make sure that you pay your taxes here. But Greg says, still paying for illegal boat people in Ukraine. When are they going to put ordinary Brits first? Paying for Ukraine is putting ordinary Brits first. It's about our defence. Connor says, don't worry, guys, it's all done for working people. And Belinda says, I remember the last time Labour were in power, Gordon Brown sold Britain's gold at a knockdown price, and their economic policies were so bad they left no money for the Tories taking over. This is indeed true. Let's go to Ian, who is in Hounslow. Hello, Ian, what do you want to say?
Good morning, Julia.
Good morning.
I've been listening to you, and I didn't watch Rachel Reeves because I would just pull my hair out. But
she's a hard listen, to be fair.
Yes. She slapped taxes without making sure existing taxes are paid. And I'll give you an example. Yeah. There's 500,000 untaxed vehicles on the road, according to the AA and the Institute of Advanced Motoring. That's 2023, at a cost to the Exchequer of £120 million.
Yeah, again, £120 million, not actually a huge amount in the big thing, but take care of the pennies, pounds take care of themselves, take care of the hundreds of millions, the billions take care of themselves. Also, if you're untaxed, you're not insured either, which is a problem.
That's my other point. Whenever you hear about a fatality, a dangerous crash, the vehicle's untaxed, uninsured, no MOT, and the bloke does another driving licence. I'll go to our next point. Margaret Thatcher got rid of the dog licence. The following year, dog attacks doubled. Now, there's 13 million dogs in this country. If we made the dog licence £5, right, that would increase public safety, ensure owner responsibility, and raise £65 million.
I'd probably raise it higher than that. I definitely think we should have a dog licence. Agree with you. Thing about these things, I agree with these things. However, it doesn't touch the sides of the billions and billions and billions and billions and billions and billions we're in debt.
I'm not finished yet, Julia. Stamp duty. Now, why should a first-time buyer have to pay stamp duty? It should be the seller who've already made their money. And these stamp duty holidays, all they did was give an opportunity to slum landlords to buy lots of houses and turn them into HMOs. When we had a stamp duty holiday, 6 HMOs opened up in our street.
These are houses of multiple occupancy.
Yeah, and they're all full of miscreants, not full of students or doctors. They're full of drug addicts, drunks, and people have been shipped out from other boroughs and dumped here.
And their rent is being paid by benefits, undoubtedly in that case. Stamp duty is a massive issue for a lot of people, and weirdly, at the top end of the market, it just completely stops people moving. So people don't downsize, they don't downsize because they're going to end up paying, tens and tens, and sometimes in some cases hundreds of thousands of pounds in stamp duty, and people just go, well, I won't move then, because I don't want to give that amount of money to the government. Again, it is interesting. It's the buyer at the point when you're probably, you know, strapped for cash is when you're paying it, as opposed to the person who's selling, who's got the money. So look, do you think your thing is she shouldn't even be thinking about more tax rises, which the OBR reckons she'll have to do until she's tackled tax avoidance? Because she talked about tackling tax evasion. That's the illegal not paying of tax.
But the thing is, look, she hasn't done that, and we've got a £13 billion foreign aid budget. Not one penny. Why
no, but it's less than that. That's already been slashed. So a lot of that's going now on defence. She's already announced that.
Defence? What about defending our border from these waves of boat people instead of getting involved in a conflict that's nothing to do with us?
I hate to tell you, Ukraine is a lot to do with us.
And I would have to beg to differ on that one. But we thought the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand was something to do with us. Well, guess what? It wasn't, and it destroyed this country.
Well, it ended up being we thought, you know, Hitler taking Sudetenland had nothing to do with us. But funnily enough, it started being very, very something to do with us very, very soon after that. Did it not?
Well, the reason was, and if you know your history, because I certainly do, the Soviet Union desperately tried to get a treaty with the West, but we ignored them in the hope that Hitler went east.
Oh, honestly.
And so they had the treaty, and then Hitler turned west.
Ian, I'm just gonna say no at this point. I really am. I've got to go to another call. Thank you for your call. Look, again, tackling tax avoidance. A lot of people would taxes that could be raised. Georgina is in London and wants to have her say on the spring statement. Georgina, what do you want to say?
Good morning, Julia.
Morning.
And might I just say that you look a lot more glamorous than our present Chancellor of the Exchequer, and you are probably more qualified to do a more superior job.
You're very, very touchy. But this is my worry. I do worry I know economics better than her, and I really don't know economics very well. That's my worry.
Well, I am convinced that you are, and I am convinced also that Rachel Reeves has already overran her use-by date. As far as the British public is concerned, she's taking liberties with taxpayers' money. It's like giving your open checkbook to a compulsive spender. You know, she's totally unqualified for this position, and she's out of her depth. The books of the UK are not balanced, and it's our most vulnerable and hard-working, normal people that are being penalised. We can't even afford the interest on our national debt, and that, for me, says that bankruptcy is just around the corner.
Well, I mean, hopefully we won't get there. But again, I don't know, a lot of people who were cheering on Fulham. I remember tackling to the then Chancellor Rishi Sunak, said everyone thinks you should Father Christmas right now during lockdown. But you know you're going to be Scrooge coming up, because we're going to have to end up paying for all of that. That's why I said we need to get back to work. We need to end the lockdowns. But a lot of people were cheering it on, and now they're surprised there's a bill to be paid.
Well, that's it. You know, people always act surprised, but we know it's coming. We know it's coming. I mean, this emergency budget has been brought about because the government ran out of cash. And I can guarantee that we'll all get financially crushed in the autumn budget. It's a classic case of the blind leading the blind. She has no idea of what's going on around her, and she's totally out of touch with the British people. You know, with great power comes great responsibility, as you know, and Rachel Reeves is not being held accountable or taking responsibility for the hole she's digging to bury our country and its indigenous population in.
Can I just say, Georgina needs to be in Parliament. I can absolutely hear that from the benches, the back benches. Georgina, thank you so much for your call. Appreciate that. More from Philip, more from me coming up, more from you coming up as well. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call to have your say. Going to talk more about the spring statement and lots more besides, including two-tiered justice once again. That's all coming from next week. This is Talk, the home of common sense.
I can announce this government will begin the biggest sustained increase in defence spending since the end of the Cold War. We will deliver our commitment to spend 2.5% of GDP on defence, but we will bring it forward so we reach that level in 2027.
The answer from European capitals has been as resounding as it is clear. We are in an era of rearmament to respond to the short-term urgency to act and to support Ukraine, but also to address the long-term need to take on more responsibility for our own European security.
On Saturday, we also agreed a new £2.2 billion loan for Ukraine, backed not by the British taxpayer, but by the profits from frozen Russian assets. It is my pleasure to bring from His Majesty the King a letter. He sends his best wishes and his regards, of course, but he also asked me to bear this letter and bring it to you. So can I present the letter from the King to you?
Thank you very much. Am I supposed to read it right now?
Yeah, please do.
I will do.
I've got to tell him what your reaction is, so I need to know. I need to know.
He is a great gentleman. A great, great gentleman. He said he thinks the war's going to go on for a long time, and he better not be right. Well, I just think he should be more appreciative, because this country has stuck with them through thick and thin. We've given them much more than Europe, and Europe should have given more than us, because as you know, that's right there, that's the border.
What kind of diplomacy, JD, you are speaking about? What do you mean?
I'm talking about the kind of diplomacy that's going to end the destruction of your country.
Yes, but if you
Mr.
are not
President,
strong...
Mr. President, with respect, I think it's disrespectful for you to come into the Oval Office and try to litigate this in front of the American media.
You're gambling with the lives of millions of people. You're gambling with World War III. You're gambling with World War III.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the home of common sense. Welcome back to the show. I very much appreciate you joining me. I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer. And whether you are listening on DAB+ radio or listening on your smart speaker, watching on YouTube or watching on your connected device, always great to have your company. Great also to have the company of my regular Thursday guest, Philip Ingram, MBE, former senior military intelligence officer. Thank you for joining us. And certainly one of the things I want to talk to you about is what's been going on at the White House in recent days. But first up, we'll be talking more about the spring statement. Rachel Reeves has been branded delusional after insisting that her economic plans are working, as official growth forecasts were halved, and the Office for Budget Responsibility, the OBR, we hear so much about them these days, warned that Brits do face, in all likelihood, further tax rises. It could come as soon as this autumn. Bearing in mind, by the way, all those tax hikes she announced last autumn that have hit the economy haven't actually hit people in their pockets yet. They haven't actually hit employers, they haven't actually hit you and me yet. And that's at 40 billion in total, 25 billion on businesses. They hit from April the 6th, when, by the way, whole host of other bills go up: your council tax, your lecky bill, your gas bill, and everything else in between. Meanwhile, inflation predicted to continue going up. That means interest rates aren't going to go down. The amount we're spending on our servicing our government debt, and indeed any mortgage you're paying, any debts you've got on credit cards and the like, they're going to stay up as well. It's all just wonderfully joyous, is it not? Meanwhile, though, the Sentencing Council has drafted new guidelines on immigration offences that would allow hundreds of illegal migrants to avoid deportation each year. That's according to the Shadow Justice Secretary, Robert Jenrick. And children as young as 7 have been reported to the police for carrying knives at school, as violent crime among pupils has risen over the past 3 years to nearly, this is extraordinary, 100,000 incidents. There was a child stabbed in the local comp to my home a few weeks ago. A 12-year-old boy stabbed 2 14-year-olds arrested, and that was within, easy, quick walking distance from my home. And this appears to be something that is a regular thing. But don't worry, as of today, the government has banned what they call ninja knives. That ban has come into force. So don't worry, everything's fine now. And also, if we could just round off the end of the kitchen knives we all buy in our local hardware store in John Lewis, then everything will be fine. Again, these people are utterly delusional. Plus, again, we are going to talk about what's been happening in America, as the White House reacted furiously last night after the Atlantic magazine decided to publish the entirety of the messages between national security officials in a Signal group chat about US strikes on Houthi rebels. President Donald Trump called the reporting all a witch hunt and declared the publication a failed magazine. But given that everyone involved said these were not items of classified information, What was the problem with publishing them in full by a journalist who'd been, I think, incredibly responsible in not publishing them in full in the first place? But we'll talk about all of that, and I do want to hear from you specifically, well, on anything we're talking about, but in particular about the spring statement. You're generally not happy so far, judging by the first calls we've taken, but Rachel Reeves is accused of balancing the books on the backs of the poor. That's what The Guardian, The Mirror and backbench MPs on the Labour bench are saying. But a big concern among businesses and, by the way, the rest of the country who pay taxes, that she won't rule out more tax rises on working people in the autumn. What is your reaction? Give us a call, 03444 499 1000. Text the word TALK to 87222. Get in touch with us at talkTV on X. And, of course, don't forget that calls are charged at the national rate. Text cost £1, standard network rate message. Let's get to Philip Ingram then. Philip, we talked a lot about the budget. I keep calling it the budget. Spring statement. We're going to have another budget in the autumn.
It was a budget.
It's a budget. Other than the fact there weren't tax rises, as our economist said, it could have been a lot worse. What do you think the impact of this is going to be in terms of all the measures that she actually announced, in terms of some welfare cuts, but welfare spending still going up? No tax rises, but with those tax rises she last announced, they're coming in next week. More money on defence, tackling a bit of tax evasion, government efficiency and the like. We hear that from every government. Every government said they're going to tackle that. They never seem to do so. At the end of the day, we're still going to be seeing, it's not austerity, it's still going to be more money, more taxes being taken and more government spending. It's just going to go up at a slightly lower rate than it did before.
The worst thing of this is, because there's nothing really decisive in it, it will just increase people's mistrust of government economic policy. And we get mistrust in government economic policy. People are then going to be more reluctant to invest and to grow their businesses and everything else, even if they could find a way around all these increased rules, regulations and employment
and there are
taxes. More
regulations in the footing, in the planning, aren't there? The employment rights.
Exactly.
And things like that.
And therefore what's going to happen is the economy is just going to stall, if not start to go into reverse. And she's setting the conditions for that. This isn't what Donald Trump's doing. This isn't what the Tories have
She
left.
says this is world events. It's world events. I know there was a world event only a few hours after she spoke yesterday in the Commons chamber when Donald Trump announced his car tariffs.
Whenever she was in opposition, COVID, which I think probably was a bit of a world event. She didn't think that the Tories could use that as an excuse.
Yes.
So
it is a bit interesting, isn't it? And this is the thing. I mean, whenever I've always tackled Labour on this, when they've said, the government finances in a terrible state. Yeah, largely because of lockdown and because of the Ukraine war. That's what really has hit us in our pocket. Both of those things were COVID was out of our control, the Ukraine war was out of our control, but we were harder hit because of the policy choices we've made previously, things like net zero policy, affecting our ability to sort of deal with the Ukraine war and the impact on energy prices, but also the decisions for lockdown. But given that Labour supported all the lockdown measures, wanted more of them and for longer, we would have had a lockdown in December 21 if Keir Starmer had been Prime Minister. And given that they completely supported the help for Ukraine and wanted there to be bailouts for people on their energy bills, I don't know why they can say that they wouldn't have happened under Labour. It would have been worse under Labour.
And what they've done is they've accelerated a lot of the green projects, a lot of the projects that aren't going to add value in the short term.
They're going to take value.
It's going to take value away from us. What they should have done was said, if they wanted to keep the political status, say we still believe in these, but we're going to implement them whenever the fiscal rules are right and park them.
Which is kind of where Kemi Badenoch is. And again, that's still not good enough for me. I prefer the Reform UK line on this, which is like, we're going to drop net zero. The targets are insane. They were plucked from thin air. They're utterly meaningless. They're not going to do anything for climate change. They're actually, they're going to make the country poorer, end of. She hasn't quite got there yet. Robert Jenrick came close to it in the leadership battles, but she's not there yet. And that's a deal breaker. I've always said there are certain things. Do you understand the biological difference between men and women? Can you basically add up? And if you can basically add up, you cannot be in favour. I love that he was just counting on his fingers then. I wish Rachel Reeves would count on her fingers. Well, someone was joking on the phone yesterday about her. There's this woman with an abacus that, she's Rachel Reeves. I wish she did have an abacus. She'd have a better understanding of maths.
What's going on. I was just trying
if she did.
Yeah, I was just doing tick box on what our Prime Minister, and I was going, oh, OK, it doesn't add up to anything.
Yeah, no, exactly. That's why I'm really clear. I mean, I don't tell people which party I vote for, because actually I voted for lots of different parties over there. But I'm very clear on the policy. I vote on the policies. I want to know what you're actually going to do. But this is the thing. Rachel Reeves is getting it from all sides. I mean, the Tories are having a go, Reform are having a go, particularly Nigel Farage pointing out quite rightly, even when they talk about, GDP is going to grow by, 1%. No, well, GDP per capita, I mean, they've halved the GDP prediction from 2% to 1%, but GDP per capita, as in how much richer we are per person on average in this country. That ain't going up. That ain't going up because we've got more people in the country, and they're going to build a load of houses. Turns out they're not going to build as many houses on the expectation is, and I've always said they're not going to build 1.5 million houses. Of course they're not. But if they're going to try, that's something. But I'm in favour of the planning reforms and all of that. But fundamentally, even if they do build all those houses, if you are, and the OBR predicts they're going to have an extra 300,000 people net coming into the country. Well, that's all those houses used up anyway.
Well, exactly. Well, Andrew Rayner turned around and said 5 out of 7 of the new houses are going for the illegal asylum seekers that are coming in. But it's the stifling of growth, and it's stifling of growth by policy. And I'm not as black and white as you. I would be quite happy if the government parks something to say when the fiscal rules allow, because you and I both know that when a government does that, it means we're never going to get round to it.
No, but I need them to accept that it's an insane policy.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, then you wouldn't just park it. You'd go, we've got to drop this policy because the numbers don't add up. Bye-bye. Thanks, Ed Miliband. Go back. Go and make yourself a cup of tea in one of your 2 kitchens.
Yeah, the trouble is the reality, especially for Labour and all the rest of it, is that proportions of their voters or those that would switch to Greens or anything else, what they're doing is playing to them.
Talking of net zero things, I've just been handed, I have in my hand a piece of paper. I've just been handed a piece of paper. This is a statement from Just Stop Oil. The headline is, Just Stop Oil is hanging up the high vis. This is very interesting. So this is a statement from them. Yes, 3 years after bursting on the scene in a blaze of orange, at the end of April, we will be hanging up the high vis. They've got a final Just Stop Oil action in Parliament Square on April the 26th. They say their initial demand to end new oil and gas in digging and mining is now government policy. Insanely, they'll drop that. Labour will drop that. I know
of course they will drop it.
Making us, they say, one of the most successful civil resistance campaigns in recent history. They say we've kept over 4.4 billion barrels of oil in the ground, and the courts have ruled new oil and gas licences unlawful. By the way, that's why your prices are going up. They said it's the end of soup on Van Goghs, cornstarch on Stonehenge and slow marching in the street. They said it's not the end of trials, of tagging and surveillance, of fines, probation and years in prison. Well, you know, if you feel so strongly about that, you're willing to take the hit. We have exposed the corruption at the heart of our legal system, which protects those causing death and destruction. I mean, it's just a load of nonsense, this, isn't it? The Just Stop Oil will continue to tell the truth in the courts. No, you won't. No. Speak out for our political prisoners. They're not political prisoners. They're criminals who broke the law. And call out the UK's oppressive anti-protest laws. They're not oppressive. You've been protesting. The problem with the protest laws was they didn't enforce them, and you were allowed to stop people going about their lawful business for a long time. They said it's not the end of civil resistance. Governments everywhere are retreating from doing what is needed to protect us from the consequences of unchecked fossil fuel burning. As we head towards 2% of global heating by the 2030s, the science is clear. Billions of people, I love this, I love it when they go, they always feel the need, don't they, to go too far. Billions of people will have to move or die, and the global economy is going to collapse. This, says Just Stop Oil, is unavoidable. We've been betrayed by a morally bankrupt political class. I mean, it just carries on. I mean, God, those long winter nights must be tiring, mustn't they? Anyway, they're going to stop doing their protests. I think they're going to stop doing their protests because everyone hates them, and actually they're not getting public support, and they have undermined their case. And I think also because British people, and I always loved those guys on the tube. Do you remember Canning Town? There was Just Stop Oil or equivalent or of the same type. I'm pretty sure they were Just Stop Oil. And they were on the roof of a this is years back now, about 5-6 years ago. They were on the roof of a tube train at Canning Town at 7:15 in the morning on a Monday or something. I remember covering it live on the show.
Driven off.
Well,
sorry, big boys rules.
Yeah, exactly. I love that. That's right. And people, can you imagine? You're in Canning Town in East London. You're on the tube platform at 7:15 in the morning, and some Egypt does that, and these blokes just started pulling them off. They just pulled them off the train, and I don't approve of this, obviously. They got a bit of a kicking because thought they did, and then basically get the trains back running. And I think the thing is like they've been doing all their protests in places like Westminster and Waterloo Bridge or whatever. You can get away with it there, not in the East End of London. They're not putting up with it. And I think really, basically, the rest of the British people went, "We're done now."
Well, you know what that statement says to me, reading between the lines, is someone from the police or the security service has gone to several key individuals in Just Stop Oil and shown them a number. And that number is how many years they're going to spend behind bars, and then showing them the draft of the asset freezing orders that have gone into their country piles and everything else where they came from, and said that's what's going to happen.
The Jacintas and the Tristans are upset that actually been called to account.
So best you stop it. So they've gone, oh, we need to stop this.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, bye-bye, Just Stop Early. It was so much fun while it lasted. They follow me on social media and are constantly messaging me, and it's like, do carry on, do carry on. By the way, I understand there has been some sort of protest where Emma Reynolds, a cabinet minister, where apologies, I said Emma, Jonathan Reynolds. There's been some sort of protest with, I believe, Jonathan Reynolds, the business secretary, speaking. So we'll try and find out what's been going on there. Right, let's go back to another topic. Let's go back to what's going on with the White House. This is your area of expertise, is it not? Where Trump officials have attacked this journalist from the Atlantic magazine over this signal leak. This is this chat, sort of equivalent like a WhatsApp chat, encrypted messaging service involving the Defence Secretary Peter Hegseth, I'm never going to be able to pronounce that man's name. The Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, National Security Advisors, and of course the J.D. Vance, the Vice President. And we learned a lot about their loathing for European freeloading and various other remarks and things. But the key thing was there was a discussion about 2 hours in advance of an attack on Houthi rebels. Now we're constantly told by Hegseth, this wasn't a war plan, it wasn't a military plan, there was nothing classified, it's no big deal. The journalist involved, I thought, had been incredibly patriotic, not revealing the full details until after the event, quite a long time after the event, and kept back what he believed was classified information. But interestingly, they said it wasn't classified, so he's released it all, and now he's being attacked for that.
Yeah. The arrogance of the group of people that were on that signal. And we say it's encrypted. It's encrypted to you and I if we want to try and break it. Governments want to get in. No, it's not. Anything on there is compromised. And for him to say it wasn't classified, yes, he'd ripped the classifications off the top. That's a classical thing for whenever you're doing that. It's an old intelligence officer's way of hiding classification. Take classification off and no one notices. When you read the level of detail that's in there, it gave you the type of aircraft. The F-18s come off the USS Nimitz. You can find on open source where the USS Nimitz is. It gave the time that they were taking off. It gave the time that they were going to be on target. That would allow the Houthis to get, and they've got quite sophisticated anti-aircraft missile systems, those put in position. The director of the CIA turned around and talked about an agent that they got on the ground. He turned around and said...
that information was redacted.
Well, you could read it quite easily. He turned around and said, we observed an individual going into his girlfriend's house, and the house, so that said that they'd got imagery over the place, which would either be from drones or from satellites. They compromised the intelligence gathering mechanisms.
As someone involved in military intelligence, that was your job. You would know that was information you wouldn't put on WhatsApp or Signal.
Well, 100%.
Would you be sacked if you did?
Yes, immediately. There'd be you'd be shown the door. You would not, your clearances would be revoked immediately. That information was, as a minimum, secret, but I've read US guidelines. It should have been top secret and would probably have been classified and that
conversation should only take place in what circumstance then?
It should only take place in a place that's called a SCIF, which is a special secure intelligence facility.
In person? You couldn't do that over any electronic device?
You could do it over electronic devices. The individuals at that level...
But not involving a mobile phone?
The individuals at that level have got special mobile devices that they can use to chat those sorts of things on, that are secure, that are...
But they're government-owned.
They're government-owned, they're government-controlled,
not your iPhone, which can be... Because the key thing, these are encrypted messages, and ideally, only the people sending the message or receiving the message can actually see it, or unless, of course, it's a journalist who's been included.
Or unless your device is compromised.
But your device can be compromised very, very easily.
Yes, very easily
Which is why...
And you won't know that it's been compromised.
Which is why even, the Defence Secretary was being interviewed earlier this week, Healy, and he was saying, often he spends large amounts of time in meetings where he's not allowed to have his phone anywhere, in the building.
Exactly.
So they've accepted even the Defence Secretary's phone could be compromised. We know Liz Truss's phone was compromised. That was taken off.
Liz Truss's, Boris Johnson's, Keir Starmer's, a lot of them are. You can turn your phone, even if someone's switched it off. You can turn the microphone and the camera on live, and the individual won't know that that's happening, and you don't know where it's transmitting to. That's why in really secure facilities, personal mobile phones, including smartwatches and all this, are just not allowed.
I hate my husband's smartwatch. We have conversations on a walk, and then an advert will come up for something. I'm like, there are three of us in this marriage. You, me, and that bird on Apple Watch.
I've stopped wearing one because it was listening into far too much, and I thought I just can't have this.
I think it's really, really sinister. I really do.
It is.
Fundamentally, but also, Peter Hegseth just saying, everyone just and Donald Trump rubbishing the editor. The editor of the this is Jeffrey Goldberg, the editor-in-chief of Atlantic Magazine. He's like sort of the editor of The Guardian, being included in this chat. He's not a fan of them. He thinks, he despises Trump and everything he stands for. But, this is a real chat. I mean, they've admitted this was real. He's a journalist. He published it. He did it very responsibly. And they're attacking him. What amazes me, though, again, we're in this ridiculous situation where you've got the Trump derangement syndrome is on the other side now. Yeah. It is the people who just say, no, if they say there wasn't a problem, there's not a problem. There is nothing that anyone in Trump's administration that could ever be done that was wrong. Reality check. This was a dumb thing to have done on all of their parts. One of them should have gone, this isn't a good idea, guys. Yeah. Peter Hegseth, absolutely mad to have done this. He was the one who released all that information. Yes. But to then attack the journalist for exposing it, and you're playing the man, not the ball at that point. I think it's embarrassing. Oh, completely embarrassing. They've lost complete credibility and shown a level of arrogance that is scary. I'm the boss, therefore I can do whatever I do. But that's along with Donald Trump, which is. But if I say something's declassified, these documents he had in Mar-a-Lago, then they are classified. But even when he said, even if I think it, then that happens. But, that's little empress syndrome. Again, if you look at all the individuals that are in there, they're not professionals in their area. They're political appointees. Even the director of the CIA. Hegseth worked in the military. No, he was a reserve officer in the Marines. Wouldn't he still know? No. Okay. Yes, he would know, but he's not worked at high level. He's been rocketed from being, a grunt to being at the very top. He's got an ego that comes with it and gone, I'm in charge of everything. Look at me. Those generals that were giving me orders beforehand, I can give them. In fact, I've sacked them. He's got an arrogance around him. Okay, all right then. Love to hear your thoughts on that, and of course on what we're talking about in terms of the Rachel Reeves balancing the books on the backs of the poor. It's what the Labour side are claiming. Many of them, her own side, others pointing out that she's not ruling out more tax rises on working people. What's your reaction? Give us a call 0344 499 1000. Just to keep you up to date though, before we go to a break, the Business and Trade Secretary, this is Jonathan Reynolds. He has been interrupted by protesters, pro-Palestinian protesters. Yawn. Calling for an end to the sale of F-35 jet parts to Israel. Because God forbid one of our allies shouldn't be able to defend themselves. Mm-hmm. The F-35s are massacring Palestinian children. They've not stopped the trade of F-35s. This man and his government are complicit in genocide, they said. Again, really do you think a lot of protesters need to get a hold of a dictionary and look up words and know what they actually mean? Mm-hmm. It's not genocide. The only genocide that's attempted to be committed is by Hamas on the Jewish people in Israel. Mm-hmm. Anyway, that's your little fact situation up to date. 11:23 is the time. We're going to take a quick break, then we're going to be talking about two-tier justice back here in Britain with Norman Brennan, a former police officer. This is Talk.
softens the noise.
That's true, although there are 200,000 members of Reform UK, and they are going to make a big noise actually this weekend. They're going to have a huge conference in Birmingham. I've spoken to one person involved who says 10,000 people will be there.
Amazing.
And I think the media is more interested, quite rightly actually, in Reform because they're leading the polls at the moment. Opposition is always very difficult, especially when you have a party that's just a bit...
I just find them uninspiring.
Yeah, I think
knackered, that's a great... Actually, I get that.
I think a lot of people feel the same way, but also there's no great love for Labour either.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the Home of Common Sense with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. 11:26 is the time. Delighted to be joined by former police officer Norman Brennan right now. A very good morning to you.
Yeah, good morning, Julia.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Lots I want to talk to you about, including a suggestion from the Shadow Justice Secretary, Robert Jenrick, about two-tier justice. We already talked about two-tier justice when it comes to a change in the sentencing guidelines at the beginning of April. Next week, where basically if you're from a minority of any kind, religious, ethnic, trans or anything, there's more likely to be a pre-sentencing report done, which could lead to you getting a lower sentence. Basically, if you're a white straight male, you're going to serve more time behind bars. But now Robert Jenrick says that actually these two-tier justice guidelines are actually going to effectively allow illegal migrants to avoid deportation as well.
I'll be quite honest with Julia, I'm lost in everything really nowadays. I've been in policing, you and I have known each other for decades, and all we ever do is do interviews. I worked out the other day, I did about 13,000 interviews, probably more than any serving or retired police officer ever. And you will know that I often talked about the sensible solutions, what we can do to protect society. Yeah. But getting back to your point, is that there should be one criminal justice system. Yep. And the criminal justice system should actually rely on making sure that everybody has the same sort of justice. We keep on hearing all these different headlines, I see them as well, and we say that certain groups may get a longer sentence in prison. Well, we never actually look into the types of crimes that those that are getting longer sentences get. For example, in London, street robberies, knife crime, gun crime, very serious crime, predominantly committed within London by the black community. So when they say
those are the official stats. It's not you saying it, that's what the stats are saying.
I was on a robbery squad for 6 years in North London. About 70% of all the robberies were committed by young black men, now, and often on other young black men. So who the hell do you think that the police should actually be targeting? The point in question, Julia, is that we seem to have been distracted by all of these different issues and these illegal immigrations or migrations that actually come into Britain illegally by boats. We don't know who they are. They're undocumented. Some are murderers. Some are abusers, rapists. They're involved in interfering with young children. If we had an aircraft fly across the channel, we'd have two jets intercepted, take it to Northolt or Stansted. They would be arrested, interviewed and probably charged or kicked out the country. Yet you can come here in a boat of 60 to 80 people that none of us know anything about.
And you're allowed to stay and probably end up staying for good. But this is the thing. So research by Robert Jenrick, the Shadow Justice Secretary, suggests that the draft guidance by the Sentencing Council would allow migrants convicted of immigration offences to escape with sentences below the threshold for automatic deportation, because the starting point for sentences are below the cut-off point of 12 months in prison, after which convicted migrants automatically face deportation. Now, these people who often automatically face deportation still often end up appealing, and then because, their kid doesn't like foreign chicken nuggets, or it might be unduly harsh on their children, even if they're a convicted paedophile, these are two real cases that have happened in the last couple of years, be prevented from being deported because of their human rights. But Robert Jenrick says, basically, given that courts are being told they should normally consider a pre-sentence report on an offender if they come from an ethnic minority, this will include these people, and basically it will mean likely to get lower sentences, likely not to be automatically deported. But I think most of us, given frankly, some of the soft sentencing we do see, I think most people would expect that if you're a foreigner who've come to this country, particularly if you're an illegal migrant, you should be deported automatically. I mean, before any other crime is committed, but certainly once you've committed another crime other than entering the country illegally, bye-bye, nothing to discuss. And I think most of us are just flabbergasted that that isn't the state of play.
Well, to be quite honest, the lunatics have not just taken over the asylum, they've taken over the criminal justice system.
Yep.
Now, we must have a criminal justice system that's fair to one and all, and it isn't. And what we're seeing now are all the excuses as why we shouldn't be sending anybody to prison. Yeah. Now, whoever you are, whether you're a legal migrant, whether you're an offender in London, Bristol or any other country, white, black, male or female, you should be given the justice that you rightly deserve. And what people don't understand, Julia, is there's two types of people that go to prison. One where the crime is so serious that they have to be sent to prison, and the others is where you've exhausted all the alternatives, from a warning right up to suspended sentence. So a magistrate or judge has no alternative but send you to prison. Yep. Yet we have the government coming out with crackdown after crackdown after crackdown. And I know, speaking to my police colleagues, that they say, Norman, we get so many targets, we only stand still, not knowing which one to hit. And when every crime, Julia, is a priority, none are a priority.
Exactly.
So we got the right people in prison for the right reasons. And what does this government do to try and reassure the public and victims of crime? Not let's lock up more people for longer and ensure that they are rehabilitated. It's let's release those that commit serious and persistent crime for the police that are beleaguered anyway. There's not enough of them to be chasing their tails.
I know, exactly. And especially as we know, I think it's something like 100,000 people are responsible for 50% of all crime. And when people say, like, you know, oh, well, we can't arrest someone for, you know, can't chase every single bag theft or burglary or shoplifting. Actually, if you did go after those people, you would cut so much crime, because those people are responsible for not just one crime. They don't just do it once, they do it every hour of every day of every month. You get them off the streets, you cut crime. It is kind of mind-boggling to most of us. Other crimes that we're again particularly concerned about is youth violence. You mentioned, you know, street robbery, street violence. The violence we've seen on our streets with you know, the machetes and the knives are absolutely terrifying. Latest report shows that due to a Freedom of Information request, children as young as 7 have been reported to the police for carrying knives at school. Violent crime among pupils has risen over the past 3 years to nearly 100,000 incidents. 23% increase in police call-outs to schools, according to the Freedom of Information request. Now, not all police areas will have actually responded to this request. Often they don't, which again I find out extraordinary. They should do. They're legally required to. But we're getting a picture there that we know. You know, you talk about extreme things. We had a man only last week who was convicted of planning a massacre at his old primary school in Luton after before he ended up killing his mother and his brother and his sister. Axel Cabana, the Southport killer. He had planned a massacre at his former secondary school as well before he attacked those girls in Southport at the Taylor Swift holiday club. I was saying, you know, a little bit earlier, my own local area. I live in a nice part of North London, and a 12-year-old was stabbed in the playground. A 12-year-old lad, a local comp. 2 14-year-old boys have been arrested. I know numerous stabbings within walking distance of my home. It's sort of becoming the norm, and invariably it seems to involve, you know, youngsters. But when it's actually happening inside school gates, that is when parents are getting seriously scared, isn't it?
Well, it is more than worrying. I've been a lead campaigner on knife crime. In fact, it'd probably be fair to say that I'm Britain's lead independent campaigner from when I was nearly murdered on duty, nicking an armed robber. So I know the devastation of knife crime. But quickly, we never used to have these knives in schools. We never used to have them actually on the streets. Today, we hear the government say that they're banning ninja knives. It took the government 8 years, Julia, just to define what the definition is. And also, it doesn't come into play today. It comes in on the 1st of August. And now we're being promised about more sentencing, tougher sentences. You don't even get sentenced for carrying a knife on the streets. Now, ninja knives...
We've been told for years, haven't we, was it 2 or 3 years we were told for carrying a knife, or even by the second offence. Even most people caught with a knife for a second offence don't go to prison, extraordinarily.
Well, I'm just about to launch a government petition. I'm just waiting for them to get back. You can't just go online and get one the next day. I've been waiting 2 months. And what we're asking for, myself and another guy, Adam Brooks, he runs a pub.
Yeah, we know Adam, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Well, the thing is that we know what will work, and I know what will work because I've been a police officer and I'm very much into law and order.
Yeah.
5 years mandatory prison sentences for any adult carrying a knife unlawfully on the streets. 3 years for a child. Mass stop and search.
Yep.
Yes, there's certain communities that are not happy with that, but there's certain people within those certain communities that are not happy with their children being murdered and them actually planning funerals rather than funerals.
Ask the mums what they think, and they'll tell you. It is absolutely extraordinary, isn't it? Can I also ask you about the announcement we've had from Just Stop Oil, who've been the bane of our lives for a number of years? OK, they're not knifing people, we get that. They've been causing untold disruption to people. And we know there's been concern about when they've, camped out along with other climate protesters, and they sort of camp out in the streets, on bridges, preventing people from going about not just their daily business, but even ambulances taking, women in labour to hospital and people trying to get to their loved ones as they're dying in hospital. Some really absolutely heartrending cases there have been. But they issued a statement today saying basically they're hanging up the high-vis. They're going to have a final action, they say, of some sort in Parliament Square on April the 26th, so in a month's time. But other than that, they say their demand to end new oil and gas is now government policy. They've been a successful civil resistance campaign and basically say it's not the end of civil resistance, but they say they're going to carry on acting, but it's the end of these sort of demonstrations and protests that have caused disruption, the end of sort of throwing soup on pictures and the like. What do you make of that announcement?
Well, we're talking about a group that are not lawful demonstrators or protesters. We're talking about people that are domestic terrorists, and they've run out of road, to be quite honest with you. They've really piddled the public off. They've taken huge amounts of police resources away from already beleaguered areas where police are dragged away from. And I think the courts have finally got wind and certainly said enough's enough.
We've had some good long sentences for people who've caused mass disruption.
That's exactly what happens. Julia, to finish off with, we need a criminal justice system that actually cares about the law-abiding public, the victims of crime and the safety of society. A government's primary role is to protect our borders, our streets, and make sure the people of Britain can go about their business peacefully. Our borders are not safe. Our streets are not safe. Our criminal justice system is in absolute chaos. And the only answer the government is to release those that have committed serious crime and persistent crime back onto the streets just to do what they do. The criminal justice system, in my professional and personal opinion, and I'm ashamed to say this, it's not just in intensive care. The family are now round the bed.
Absolutely, yeah, indeed. The priest has been called for the last rites. Norman Brennan, former police officer, I'd be amazed if there's anyone listening to this that wasn't nodding and cheering every single word of what you had to say. Thank you so much. Philip Ingram, your thoughts?
I agree with Norman completely. Our criminal justice system is just not fit for purpose. And we're not seeing anything coming out of the government to try and fix it. That's the worrying thing. And therefore, this is yet another area where things are only just going to get worse.
Absolutely. And again, the Tories, it went worse under the Tories. They didn't build the new prisons that we needed to enforce. We've had stupid priorities from the police and woke stuff and policing people on Twitter and X rather than people on the streets. But this lot, I think, are going to be even worse than this. They fundamentally don't really think that prison's a good thing. This idea like women shouldn't go to prison if they commit crimes. That's not equality.
We fundamentally undermine our whole justice system if we bring in something that is not equal and takes no countenance of whether you're male, female, black, white, green, purple or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. Love to hear your thoughts on what Norman Brennan had to say. 11:39's time. We're going to take a quick break. The way to get to your calls coming in thick and fast, particularly on this spring statement. But you're welcome to call in on any of the topics, including criminal justice. This is Talk, Home of Common Sense.
the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the home of common sense, for me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. Time to squeeze in some calls from you. 1142 0344 499 1000 is the number to call, particularly about the spring statement, your reaction to what Rachel Reeves had to say yesterday. Ray is in Colchester. Hello, Ray.
Yes, good morning to you. And what a lovely morning it is.
It's lovely.
Bright sunshine to offset, shall we say, the doom and gloom that was yesterday. Although, to be fair, I don't think it's going to be able to do it. But really, the reason I called was actually about law and order, because in a few days, on April 1st, I become a second-class citizen, written into law under, as we become, basically, the indigenous people of this country become second-class citizens within their own country. And at the same time...
And just so people know, this is the sentencing guidelines, which apparently the government doesn't support, but even though they're not doing anything about it, other than a stern letter to sentencing guidelines, because they're independent quango. I don't know why we think we should have an independent quango in charge of whether people get sent to jail or not. But basically, if you're a white, straight man, you're definitely at the bottom of the pile, and you're more likely to serve longer in jail, basically.
But then we have the icing on the cake, because, of course, part of that sentencing guidelines will now mean that any of our, shall we say, invaders that are coming over, illegally breaking every rule we have, will now not be actually at all any chance legally of being sent from the country.
Certainly less likely,
This is all part of the long march through our great institutions. I mentioned the other day, we now have a Labour government who are basically either incompetent, which I always thought they would be, but are deliberately wrecking what is left of us, and at the same time, through every single institution we have, is now being deliberately wrecked.
I mean, I have to say, they can't pretend they don't know, and that's the thing. And so in which case it must be deliberate. I mean, a lot of people, I think, feel that way. Ray, I really appreciate that call. Thank you very much indeed. Don't think we won't be talking about that a lot on April the 1st. Let's go to Chris in Hereford. Hello, Chris.
Hello, how are you?
Very well. Lovely to speak to you. What do you want to say?
Yeah, well, I spoke to you about earlier in the week about the benefits cut.
I remember, yeah.
Yeah. I honestly, I watched the statement, and I still don't know if we're going to be worse off or not.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people are being very scared when they don't know, but that's a worry, isn't it? People should know whether it's going to affect them or not.
The point I wanted to make, you made a point about people going to work depressed and basically they're down and all that. And basically, I now have been to the doctors, and now I have been diagnosed as Graves' disease, basically, and I've looked into it, and it's an incurable disease. There's no cure for it. It affects the thyroid, basically affects all parts of your body, and that includes mood swings and everything. But I'm still going to go to work, because the best thing to do if you're down is to go to work, meet people, and talk to people.
Yeah. And have that social interaction and that feeling of self-respect and self-esteem from getting a job done.
You do. And as I said, my doctors told me there is a time that you will have to stop working, because one of the symptoms I get as well is tremors. I get shake quite a bit because of my thyroid, because it affects all parts of your body.
Yeah.
And the doctors told me in the next 3 or 4 years, you might not be able to work at all, because
it's really hard.
Your disease.
Yeah,
so,
and we as a country need to be there for you at that time, but you want to look after yourself until then.
Yes,
and that's the attitude we need. That's what we're looking for, isn't it? Chris, look, I wish you the best of luck. Keep on calling. Always love to hear from you. Thank you very much, Chris. Quick word from Philip Ingram on that.
Yeah, well, it's, we're getting two-tier across the board, and this is where people who are really in need are the ones that are losing out.
Yeah, or fearing losing out.
And fearing losing out, and this is where we're getting no confidence out of the statements that are coming out of our politicians.
But part of this, isn't it, just don't believe in the competence of the country anymore, and the people running the public sector who are sitting at home, a lot of them, and again, assessing people online. You can't assess someone. You need you need to be medically trained. You need to be in person. You need to be, it's not just like a half-an-hour meeting. I mean, these forms are impossible to fill out by all accounts anyway. And again, someone might be good on one day and bad on another day, and that again makes it difficult to be a reliable employee. I get all of that, but come on, it's not beyond the wit of man. Other countries manage it.
Yeah, exactly. And the bureaucracy that people have to go through to do things is just shocking.
I mean, most working people would not be able to cope with filling out some of these forms. Often people have to get, see a citizen's advice to come and help them fill out the forms, don't they? Yeah. Really interesting. Thank you very much for those calls. Keep your calls coming in. Lots more messages coming in. Basically, not largely, I would say, firm fans of Rachel Reeves, what she's had to say. Coming up, we are going to be talking more about that signal leak and what is going on in Ukraine, and why Zelensky says that, well, please hold on, please look out, Europe, stay by my side, because Putin's going to die before me, he says. Well, we'll talk about all of that up next with Edward Lucas, who's a security specialist working at the Times. This is Talk, the Home of Common Sense.
So, no tax changes this time round. Okay. After that £40 billion tax raid in October, which obviously is going to kick in most of the time, first new tax year in April. What this means, though, is growth, which the government were relying on coming down the line. They needed that growth to earn more income for the government, and they'd have to not have to cut the size of the state, and they would not have to cut benefits, and they could just carry on willy-nilly. That has spectacularly failed. It's there in black and white. The growth forecast for this year slashed in half, but the country's going to grow by 1% this year.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the Home of Common Sense, with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. 11:50 is the time. Philip Ingram's still with me. Delighted to be joined now by columnist at the Times and security specialist Edward Lucas as well. Very good morning to you, Edward.
Morning, Julia.
Thank you for joining us. I want to talk about both what's going on in Ukraine and the ceasefire talks, but also first what's been going on inside the White House, and almost at war with themselves over this revelation of this leak of this signal chat between not just the Vice President, the Defence Secretary, National Security Advisor, Secretary of State. I mean, you name it, everyone involved was at a very, very high level in this signal chat that was leaked to a leading left-wing Democrat supporting journalist. And this, of course, has been dominating news in America, has huge implications for intelligence sharing here as well. But what do you make of the Trump officials who now, including Donald Trump himself and the Defence Secretary Pete Hegseth, attacking the journalist Jeffrey Goldberg, who revealed this after the information was no longer of import because the attack on the Houthi rebels had already taken place, but crucially basically keeping back what he believed was classified information. The White House and others saying there was no classified information. He's now released the full chat, clearly revealing to anyone with half a brain that there was stuff in there that should have remained top secret. What do you make of the White House response?
Well, I think if this was an episode of The West Wing, they would call it when you're in a hole, stop digging. And given that they all knew what was on that Signal chat, to deny that there was anything classified in those messages, in the knowledge that an entire copy of the chat was in the hands of the guy who was writing about it, looks to me like a pretty stupid move. And I think that a head is going to have to roll for this. I wonder if National Security Advisor Waltz is going to stay in his position, because
well,
although
there was some talk about him being ousted, but then we're told that the president has full faith in him.
Well, that's often a sign, as you know, that someone's for the chop. I mean, I'd be terrified if my bosses said we have full confidence in Edward Lucas. Getting onto LinkedIn to look for another job immediately. But I think it is embarrassing. And I think this kind of shoot the messenger approach works well up to a point. And it's true that, you know, a lot of the American media is so absolutely gripped with their hatred of Trump that whatever he does, they'll say it's bad. But this was a genuine mistake. If anyone more junior had done this, they would not only be fired, but probably prosecuted and quite likely jailed.
Yeah.
And for a lot of the sort of, you know, very patriotic Americans who support Donald Trump because they want to make America great again, they know that America has real secrets and real military capabilities, and they care about that, and they want those capabilities to be safeguarded.
Yeah. And indeed, there are service personnel involved in those attacks on Houthi rebels who may have been put at risk. But this is the thing: there is definitely, you know, Trump derangement syndrome on the left, the Democrat side. Anything he says, even if he, you know, he says something completely sensible, like Europe should be paying more for their own defence, they lose their minds. But they also lose their minds in defending this, saying nothing bad has happened, when these are the same people who cheered along with, you know, lock her up, when Donald Trump in 2016 said that Hillary Clinton should be locked up for using an email server and her own personal email for some State Department matters, which she absolutely should not have done and was wrong to do so. But to complain about that and then not have any issue whatsoever with this Signal equivalent like WhatsApp type group is frankly risible. It's laughable, isn't it?
Well, I think, Julia, you better be careful if you're planning to go to the United States anytime soon. They may check out your broadcasting history when you get to immigration, and say you're not the kind of person that should be in America because of your critical attitude to the great leader. You're right, there is Trump derangement syndrome on both sides. There are people who lose their minds when they're critical of him and fail to see all the faults of the Democrats. But there's also Trump derangement syndrome among his fans who believe that the great helmsman can do no wrong. It's almost sort of North Korean in their adulation. And I think the real point here is that this isn't just some kind of game. This isn't the West Wing. It's not the thick of it. This is real stuff. There are real soldiers taking real risks on real operations. There are real spies who take real risks with real sources to get secrets that really matter. And so this isn't some kind of game. There's also real alliances. You know, countries like Britain, which have sent their men and women in uniform uncomplainingly to die in operations all over the world, US-led, often of questionable success and planning. And for us to be told that we're random allies, random countries that haven't fought a war in 30 or 40 years, that we're that doesn't go down very well. I mean, it's all very well to beat up on some of the useless allies, but America's greatness is based on really serious allies, and that includes the United Kingdom. And I don't think that they've quite realised how badly this is going down.
No, exactly. Gosh, I can remember post 9/11 being in New York in I think it was December 2001, and if you walked into a bar, you couldn't buy a drink. People would not even they said, no, your drinks are on us. You know, thank you so much for your, you know, for being so, you know, Britain being such a great ally. You're thinking, well, I'm not doing anything. I'm not fighting a war, but thanks very much. I'll take my free glass of wine. A very, very different attitude now, doesn't it, Phil? Let's also talk about where we are with Ukraine. These ongoing ceasefire talks of a ceasefire in the Black Sea only benefits Russia, really. But again, once again, as Emmanuel Macron pointed out at talks with Zelensky yesterday, Putin changes the terms even after he's agreed to terms. But it was very interesting, I think, mostly yesterday with this meeting in Paris, and we've got our Prime Minister and other leading figures meeting the coalition of the willing in Europe today to talk about what they can do. Doesn't sound like there's many in the willing list. But it was interesting that President Zelensky, in interviews that he has done with British media, talking about how, look, you know, he wants Europe to stay on side with him and the Ukrainian people. And he points out that, Vladimir Putin is going to die before him. Basically, he's an old man. There's concerns about his or beliefs about his ill health. I'm just wondering if how long we can wait, because I imagine Vladimir Putin does get the best medical care going.
Yes, he doesn't look terribly healthy, I have to say. And this
also, he needs a better plastic surgeon.
Puffy face, Botox, there's all sorts of theories. There's also theories that there are actually several Putins. He's got body doubles. Yes. Some of the people who appear on telly claim to be the president of Russia seem to have differently shaped ears to some of the other people, but that may just be a conspiracy theory. It's certainly an entertaining one. Well, I think it's very interesting that Zelensky seems remarkably cheerful, given that the military position isn't great and the diplomatic position isn't great. And my take on the talks in Riyadh and this so-called deal that was produced at the end of it, or deals, was that really Ukraine got knifed and Russia got rewarded. The Russian readout is that they're getting sanctions relief on their agricultural and fertilizer exports, which would, of course, be extremely useful for the United States, which needs to get its fertilizer from somewhere that isn't Canada, now that they're picking a fight with the Canadians. And so there's in this sort of transactional Trump world, why not do a deal with Russia, get lots of fertilizer, and the Ukrainians can suck it up and so can the Europeans.
It's not much a point of us, being coalition of the willing, hopefully, and wanting more sanctions on Russia pushed to the table if Donald Trump is basically saying you can have what you want.
Yes, I mean, the Europeans actually do matter quite a lot in this. It's in Europe, for example, that most of the Russian central bank assets, which were frozen at the start of the war, are still sitting. And I think that the more that Trump pushes Europe, the more Europe is getting its act together, whether it's on the military side or on other diplomatic things. And I think we may well see movement on those $300 billion dollars worth of central bank assets that could be spent on, give that to Ukraine and they can buy the weapons they need, even if the Americans won't send them. But there is a fundamental problem that the Europeans are very dependent on American military, intelligence, nuclear and other security support, something that has actually suited the United States largely over the years. And if we are going to, if we're on a collision course with the White House over Ukraine, where the White House is saying make peace, and Ukraine says we want to keep fighting, and we say we're with you, Ukraine. Well, what happens when we actually collide? Because we are not in a great position to bluff on this.
No, indeed. I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there. I could talk to you all morning. Edward Lucas, columnist at the Times, a security specialist. Do come on again very, very soon. I'm going to get Philip Ingram's thoughts on all of that. I know you're itching to have your say on all of that. Coming up next, we're going to be talking to Reform UK's chairman, Zia Youssef, and talk about all things in the news about that. This is Talk, the Home of Common Sense.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the Home of Common Sense with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. 2 minutes past 12 o'clock. It is the time. Lots and lots more to talking about. And whether you are listening on DAB+ radio or on your smart speaker, watching on YouTube or on your connected device, it is great to have your company. Coming up in this hour, we're going to be talking more about Chancellor Rachel Reeves. She's been branded delusional after she insisted their economic plans are working as official growth forecasts were halved. And the OBR, the Office of Budget Responsibility, warned that Brits face further tax rises even as early as this autumn. The question is will Rachel Reeves survive past that? Plus, the Sentencing Council has drafted new guidelines on immigration offences that would allow hundreds of illegal migrants to avoid deportation each year by getting lower sentences. And the Office for Students has warned that universities could face multi-million-pound fines for breaches of freedom of speech rules. We had about a £500,000 fine for University of Sussex announced this week, but next time it could be in the millions. Yeah, start paying attention to freedom of speech universities. It's not complicated. Plus, armed gangs in Gaza have called for an uprising against Hamas as a second day of protest challenged the terror group's control of the Strip. They're saying that they are responsible for their children dying. Well, yeah, tell us something we don't know, but will these protests get mass support, or will they be quashed by the Hamas terrorists who are in charge? We'll talk about all of that, plenty more to come. I do want to hear from you on any of the topics we're talking about, particularly the spring statement. Rachel Reeves accused of balancing the books on the backs of the poor. That's what lots of Labour backbenchers, indeed the Mirror and the Guardian, are saying. They're supposed to be the Labour cheerleading newspapers. But she also won't rule out more tax rises on working people, and certainly the Office of Budget Responsibility seem to expect that's what she's going to do. So what's your reaction to the spring statement? Give us a call. 0344 499 1000. Text the word talk in your message to 87222. Get in touch with us on X at talkTV. Calls are charged at the national rate. Text cost £1, standard network rate message. Delighted to say that still with us is Philip Ingram, MBE, former senior military intelligence officer. And I know before we go to our next guest who's waiting on the line, I do want to give you a chance to come back on what our previous guest, Edward Lucas, had to say about both what is going on in terms of those ceasefire talks in Ukraine, something you and I have talked so many times about in the last few years, but also about that White House basically, telling everyone, nothing went wrong when they basically accidentally included a journalist in their signal group chat about imminent military action.
Well, I think you take the latter. There's an arrogance in the White House that comes from the top with Donald Trump.
Yeah.
If he was being mature and his team were being mature, they'd turn around and say, look, we made a mistake. We've analysed it, we've done a risk assessment against it, and we've assessed that there's no risk, but we've learned our lessons, we're not going to let that happen again.
Yeah.
It would go away. It would go away tomorrow if that happened. But they're not doing that. And that...
It's always best just to admit when you've done things wrong.
Exactly. And that translates into what's going on with the peace talks in Ukraine and everything else. There's a merry dance. It's a waltz, but it's a waltz where they're playing hard rock punk music and people are trying to waltz to it, so they don't know what to do or where to go, I think.
Yeah, I mean, do you think we are going to see any proper ceasefire in Ukraine anytime soon?
No. Not at all.
That's the reality. Putin doesn't want it. Although, again, as Zelensky pointed out in these interviews, actually, he was very clear. He's basically calling, he's calling Putin's bluff. He doesn't want peace. So that's why if we agree to an unconditional ceasefire, there you go, ball in your court. But what we need is Trump and his advisors to wake up to the fact that Putin doesn't want peace.
Trump's got an arrogance, and he wants a peace deal. He doesn't care whether it's going to hold or not. He wants something that he can flag up and say, right, there's my application for the Nobel Peace Prize. So give me the Nobel Peace Prize. If he doesn't get that, then he's going to become arrogant and he's going to make random decisions that make no logic whatsoever.
Very interesting. Thank you very much. Love to hear your thoughts on that. Give us a call, 0344 499 1000. Right, let's get to my first guest of this hour. Delighted to welcome the Chairman of Reform UK, Zia Yusuf, back to the show. A very good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon.
Thank you very much, Steve, for joining us. Lots to talk about. Let's talk first about the spring statement. Doesn't seem that anyone on either the left, even the Guardian and the Mirror, who, backing Labour for the election, backing Rachel Reeves, they're even ahead of this statement, doesn't look like they're happy. She's been accused of balancing the books on the backs of the poor. They're on the same side. The newspapers, the journalists and everybody else on the right, or anyone working, unhappy about the fact that actually we're probably going to see more tax rises. We're not going to see any growth. Things are going to get worse before they, if ever, get better. Whose side are you on?
Well, you put it well. hardworking people who are listening and watching this program know, every time they do their weekly shop, it gets more expensive. Every time they open their electricity bill or their gas bill, it gets meaningfully more expensive. And both those things, Julia, are rising much, much faster than people's salaries and their wages. And that is a function of 14 years of Conservative rule. We should not forget they left office, supposedly the party of low taxes and government spending under control. They left government spending totally out of control and the tax burden on working people at the highest level since World War II. Now, what Labour have done with her first budget, and it's funny how she wants to blame Donald Trump for this. Donald Trump, last I checked, was not the president of the United States when she gave her first budget last year. They are continuing to raise taxes. The argument that they're not raising it on working people ultimately is a nonsense, because as we know, this increase in national insurance contribution for employers is a tax on jobs and will hit workers. That's the OBR's analysis, not just ours. So the whole thing is a farce. We have utterly incompetent people making the most important decisions in this country, namely Rachel Reeves and sadly Ed Miliband. So long as we have the most expensive energy prices in the world, we cannot have growth in this country. The OBR's halved growth forecasts again down to 1%. By the way, the Bank of England is at 0.7%. We are heading for a recession, sadly, in this country. We need a wholesale reset in the way politics is done in the UK. We need to dramatically cut the waste in government, get taxpayers much better value for the money that they are spending, and we need to cut taxes so that working people have more money in their pockets and small and medium-sized businesses can breathe again.
Well, you mentioned one, I think, of the big elephants in the room. One of those is net zero. You were the only party at the last election and stuck by it, who believes that we should drop the net zero targets. It's arbitrarily chosen targets will make no difference whatsoever to the world's climate in any way whatsoever, and are costing the country a fortune. We've seen, stat after stat, anyone who pays attention, that this is national economic suicide to go ahead with this. Did you welcome, though, Kemi Badenoch, the Tory leader, when she the other week actually said, we need to think about, pushing these targets and basically started to walk away from those net zero targets to which the Tories have been signed up just as much as Labour?
Not really, because the reality is they were the ones who, of course, it was Theresa May who enshrined all of this stuff into law. All of the things that you hear from these senior Tories now, essentially they are railing against their own record in government. People are not that silly. And frankly, because Reform is around, because Nigel Farage and our other MPs are around to just remind British people to the degree that they need reminding. This was the party that promised in 4 consecutive manifestos to bring net migration down to tens of thousands and left office with that number at 1 million per year. The net zero catastrophe, the foolhardy unilateral economic disarmament of this country was absolutely the handiwork of the Conservative Party. Okay. And frankly, the British people are too smart to take anything that Kemi Badenoch is saying seriously.
You mentioned their immigration. The second big elephant in the room, it was something that your leader, Reform UK leader Nigel Farage, mentioned in Commons yesterday in response to the spring statement, pointing out that when we say, halving of growth by the OBR, the forecast, we know the forecasts are always wrong and nearly always a little bit too optimistic, frankly, but from 2% to just 1% this year. And he pointed out, actually, we won't see growth because if you have more people coming in, it's divided between more people per head is what really matters, rather than if you bring in a load of extra people. The OBR are predicting, according to their growth forecast, that we are going to be seeing something along the lines of net immigration to this country of 300,000 people on average a year over the next 4 years. Given that is basically less than half of what we've seen in recent years in terms of net migration, the number of people coming more than the number of people leaving the country. Those figures are entirely unfeasible, I think many would say. Do you think that we can get to grips with growth and tackling the desperate need that we have in this country for growth if we continue to have mass immigration? But if we don't have mass immigration, who are we going to get to build all those houses, work in the NHS and do all the jobs that apparently, we're told again and again, British people won't do?
Well, that's the false choice that is always presented to the British people. It's either open borders and we can eke out 0.1% economic growth, or you have no immigration and the economy collapses. It's a nonsense. If you look at the record under Boris Johnson, so if you look at the 3.1 million net new people who arrived here, for example, the last 6 years, what people call the Boris wave, those 3.1 million who came from non-EU countries, Julia, 85% of them did not come in on work visas. We talk about the NHS. Both my parents are frontline NHS workers and have been for decades. You could restaff every doctor and nurse in the NHS with just last year's net migration numbers alone. In fact, you could do it twice over. So it's a total nonsense. What we need is a serious immigration policy. We need to freeze net migration, not forever, but for at least a number of years, while we can allow enough homes to be built so our young people in this country have something of a future and have a fair crack of the whip, until we can build enough prison places. I mean, we're hearing a lot of stuff from the Tories now about law and order. In the 14 years of Conservative rule, they added 6.5 million net new people to this country through immigration. And do you know how many new prison places they built? 435. And we know that because the Tories' own Richard Holden got that answer to one of his own questions somehow. So it's a catastrophe. And the number of hospital beds, we have fewer hospital beds. The Tories left the country with fewer hospital beds than when it started, despite adding those 6.5 million net new people. So we have to repair all of this. We have to freeze net migration. We have to make sure that we have enough infrastructure that is built. And that will mean, to the degree we are issuing visas, it will only be in areas with acute skills shortages, which are desperately needed, while simultaneously ensuring we are building capacity for homegrown British people to do those
Okay,
jobs.
and how do we do that? Because one of the big topics of debate in the last few weeks has been the welfare cuts, welfare reforms. You get the usual suspects on Labour benches wringing their hands, saying, you know, basically every single person on benefits, particularly disability and sickness benefits, is totally genuine, absolutely can't work. We need to keep giving them more money and more money, more money. Clearly an absolute nonsense. Our disability, growth of the disability claimants is off the scale, certainly since lockdown. It's largely things that are pretty much unverifiable objectively. It's stress, anxiety, depression, autism, ADHD. It's not sort of, you know, someone's, you know, got a debilitating disease that physically stops them from being able to be a reliable employee to go out to work. We've also got the situation where we've got the Rachel Reeves saying that she wants to cut some of these benefits, but actually, you know, there's a 2-year backlog on people being reassessed anyway. Most people are only assessed over the phone, not in person. They're not making everyone go back to work to an office. So I don't know how we're even going to do any of this. Do you think that her welfare reforms go too far, not far enough? And what would you, if Reform were in power, if you did win a power at the next election, what would you do?
Well, number one, Reform is really clear. We're on the side of working people. We're on the side of people who set their alarm clocks in the morning and go to work to better their own lives, that of their family and their community, and indeed their country. We have to ensure, yes, that the people who really need benefits are protected. But we know that billions of pounds of hardworking British taxpayers' money is spent on fraudulent benefit claims. You're absolutely right. It is frankly far too easy to make those claims. It's easier than ever. The ease at which you can now go on to long-term benefits is unprecedented in this country. And there's no excuse for that, because you're absolutely right. We have to have the right capacity in terms of ensuring that the people who do need help get it. The people who are frankly taking advantage of the system should not be allowed to get it. And unfortunately, we do need to go back to the point out about immigration again, because we are spending billions upon billions of pounds on benefits and welfare into foreign citizens of foreign countries, many of whom who have come here illegally. So all of this stuff is connected. And I go back to that original point. We need a wholesale new approach to the way.
But how do we do that? I mean, a lot of people listening to this will completely agree with that. Yeah, absolutely. How do we actually do that? How do we make sure the assessments mean that the people who do need the help, and we desperately want to help the people who do need the help, and make sure they can live a decent life, you know, with the grace of God, you know, that you or I are in a situation where we couldn't work and we were severely disabled, or our child was, and we had to be their carer. And, you know, we're lucky that we're not in that situation. But how do we make sure that those people still get the help, but we stop the people who frankly could work, the people who are defrauding us, the people who are swinging the lead? How do we actually do that? Everyone talks a good game, but how do we do it?
Well, look, that's the policy work that we have people working with, very smart people working on this as we speak. So number one, our approach will be, we will have people who are qualified to make such assessments. We will need to stand up that capacity and do it in a very efficient and large-scale way. So that's the first thing we need to do. Number two, we need to change the incentives, Julia, because in this country, the most insane thing about all of this is we hear time and again from people who are on welfare and say, we actually want to start working, but we can't, because if you're on benefits and you start working more than 16 hours per week in this country, your marginal rate of tax is more than 100% when you take into account the loss of benefits. So they say, listen, we want to start working again. We really want to do that. But if we do it, we're in this crazy situation where we literally have less money in our bank account at the end of the month. so long as these crazy incentives exist, Julie, we're never going to solve these problems. The final thing I'll say, and this is another flagship policy that I don't think gets talked about enough, one of the first taxes that Prime Minister Farage will cut are taxes on earnings below £20,000 per year. So again, those who are either entering the workforce for the first time, elderly people who are saying, I want to start working again, or people who are just ultimately trying to come off benefits will get to keep all of their money up until they get to that £20,000. At the moment, we have the crazy situation where you are better off staying on benefits than working.
Okay, personally, I would have a situation where you just weren't eligible for the benefits if you're able to work. End of. Again, I know somebody who works the benefits office, people who are working just 2 days a week because that's what they have to do to get all of their benefits. They get offered the extra 3 days a week. They say, you know, well, am I better off or not better off? They often are. 20 quid a week better off. It's not worth their while. They stay on benefits. That shouldn't be an option.
Well, that's what those assessors would need to do, Julie. As you said, one has to, in order to ensure the people who do need the help get it. As I said, number one, you have to change the incentives so the people who do want to work, of whom there are millions, by the way, in this country.
I don't really care if they do want to work or not. They have to work. I don't think people should have to want to work. You either can't work or you work. Those are the two options.
I'm specifically talking about, Julia, the people. This is the lowest hanging fruit. There are millions of people in this country who are currently collecting benefits who want to work but feel trapped because of the crazy way our tax system works and the tapering of benefits. But you're absolutely right. We're on the side of hardworking people who set their alarm clock in the morning. They can't continue to carry the burden of this spiralling welfare cost.
Let me also ask you, you know I have to ask you about this. I know you will get cross when I ask you about this, but what the ongoing battles with Rupert Lowe, certainly very personal between you and Rupert Lowe, was until very recently one of your party's 5 MPs. You've made an accurate complaint to the police, complaining that he made violent threats to you. That is something that's being investigated, something that has been denied by Rupert Lowe. But there has been a report issued this week by an independent KC who was asked by the party to carry out an investigation into whether or not there had been basically harassment of two members of staff in Rupert Lowe's office. And the KC who's written that report has said there is veracity, credible evidence in those complaints, something that he has categorically denied. Also that one of those complaints made by a female member of staff was specifically against Rupert Lowe, and that complaint went in before we are told, you know, that Nigel Farage had his feathers ruffled by that interview in the Daily Mail when Rupert Lowe talked about him being a messianic figure. And now we learned in the last 24 hours that Jacqueline Perry KC, the KC required, was not told in advance that report was going to be published yesterday, and that Reform UK jumped the gun. Why did you publish the report ahead of when the KC had agreed it would be published?
So, Julia, the report that
came out,
we've published the report in the interests of full transparency. People can go read it, and the conclusions are as you just described. The party's acted entirely properly throughout this process. It's obviously not been pleasant at all. It's not something that Lee Anderson nor I enjoyed at all. It's been an unpleasant episode. As far as we're concerned now, this is the KC investigation has been completed, and people can go and read the report for themselves.
But why did you release the report ahead of when the KC expected the report to be released?
We didn't. We did not do that.
So she's lying.
Hold on.
She was. She wrote an email email to Rupert Lowe's legal team. It is claimed that she, again, unless Rupert Lowe is lying. I mean, again, who knows? But Jacqueline Perry Casey said she was surprised and disconcerted to discover that her findings had been released sooner than expected on Tuesday. Unless that is simply not true, and she didn't say that. She thought it was released before it was supposed to be released. Why would you do that?
What I will say is this: the report has been published. It is clear for everybody to see.
So you're not denying that, then?
I am absolutely denying.
So she knew it was going to be released then.
That we've acted in any way improperly in terms of when we published the report. But
no, but she says that the claim is that she had given Rupert Lowe and his legal team until Wednesday to respond, and then the report was published on the Tuesday, so that he didn't have time to respond.
Julia, number one, Mr. Lowe himself declared on social media last week that he would not be cooperating with the investigation.
Why not wait the extra day?
Secondly, and this is the last comment I'll make on this because the report is there for everybody to read. The second point is that he had a solicitor engaging with the independent KC, and that solicitor also confirmed that Mr. Lowe would not be responding prior to that deadline. So I absolutely deny that the party's acted in any way improperly or jumped the gun. We've acted entirely properly throughout this process.
OK. Are you glad to be rid of him?
Look, it's been a really unpleasant experience, Julie. It's not something that anyone in any political party, I think, wants to go through. But we're now focused on the future. We've got over 1,600 brilliant candidates who are going to be standing for council for reform ahead of the May the 1st elections. And we've got Sarah Pochin, who has been a magistrate for 2 decades, who will be running to become the next Member of Parliament for Runcorn and Health.
Other candidates obviously will be... Other candidates for other parties would, of course, be standing in not just for local elections, but also, of course, in that by-election when it's called. I just want to go back. Given that there was a personal issue between you and Rupert Lowe, we've had claims and counterclaims. None of us were there. We don't know what was said, what was done. He's denied the allegations that we understand. The police are investigating the claims that you have made. You know what's been going on online. You know that there's been a lot of support from the online right for Rupert Lowe. You've been very clear, Richard Tice, Nigel Farage and others have been very clear that you feel that the right thing has been done in removing the reform whip from, basically 1/5 of your MPs. You've had an awful lot of abuse from an awful lot of people on the online right. A lot of people accusing Nigel Farage of selling out, going moderate, going mainstream, and that part of that is appointing you. People are particularly singling out the fact that you are a Muslim by faith, and of course are from an ethnic minority, pointing out your race and your religion as being an issue. What did you make of those? I can't believe you haven't seen those huge numbers of messages concerning those factors about you.
Yeah, look, if you go into politics on the front line, Julia, you know what you're getting yourself into. It is a rough old game, and you've got to have a thick skin. We're more determined than ever to ensure that Reform wins the next general election. We've made huge progress into the general government, 14% in the polls, 26% in the average. We've added 160,000 new members, and that's continuing to rise. You can see that on our ticker online in the last 8 months. So that's what we're focused on. And listen, of course, you see all sorts of things, crazy things going on Twitter. We're not letting any of that stuff distract us.
OK, thank you for joining us. Sir Yousaf, Chairman of Reform UK. Philip Ingram, listening to all of that, whichever you'd like to come back in on.
Oh, there's so much in it. There's so much in all of that. I think what I'd like to see out of Reform is a solidification of a lot of their policies, and them turning themselves from a party of protest into
sound like Rupert Lowe
into something that is more mainstream. But the whole
we need to have some detail.
Exactly, the whole issue with Rupert Lowe has hurt Reform badly in the eyes of a lot of people that are out there. And
do you think so? Because I think the argument seems to be actually from Nigel Farage and others that actually a lot of his views are kind of beyond the pale to average voters, and actually you're not going to win an election by appeasing the online right on X.
I think what it's done is, and this ties in with previous comments that we've had, it's brought in the polarisation that there is. Instead of there being informed debate, it's polarisation. So the Rupert Lowe supporters are hard Rupert Lowe supporters. The Nigel Farage supporters are hard Nigel Farage supporters. And neither of the twain shall meet. The reality is somewhere in the grey zone.
I find the number of messages that are supportive of Rupert Lowe, which are abusive, blatantly racist abuse of Zia Yousaf, I find very. I'm not in any way accusing Rupert Lowe of those views, but it has been very shocking.
And it's a sad reflection of social media society today.
Well, exactly. Right. I'd love to hear your thoughts on all of that. Do get in touch. We'll get your calls in just a couple of moments. It's coming up to 12:26 right now. It's time to find out how you could be with a chance of winning Oasis tickets at Wembley this summer and £10,000.
How do you fancy winning tickets to the hottest gig of the century? Here at Talk, we're giving you the chance to bag yourself a pair of tickets to Oasis at Wembley this summer. Plus, we're giving away a whopping 10 grand and putting you up for the weekend in a London hotel. All you need to do is text the word prize to 83338 and you're in the draw. Alternatively, you can enter by post. Once again, all you need to do is text the word prize to 83338 or you can enter by post. Good luck.
18 plus UK excluding Northern Ireland. Enter by text for £2 plus one standard network charge by 11 p.m. on the 7th of April 2025. Or post your name and number to Oasis Competition, PO Box 3190. Colchester CO2 8GP to arrive by 5 p.m. on the 10th of April 2025. Full terms and conditions at talksport.com.
This is a news broadcasting network promotion.
Right, let's take a quick break. A very good luck to you in that competition. Up next, we'll take your calls. 0344 499 1000. This is Talk.
Hugely divisive on the backbenches. They'd be hugely divisive in terms of the other measures they're going to take, such as trying to thin out the civil service, which the unions are already pushing back on, and the unions who fund the Labour Party. And I think the Cabinet itself in the last Parliament received about £500,000 in donations directly to those Cabinet ministers. So to think they're going to have this big fight with the unions over this is for the birds.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Talk, the home of common sense, for me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. Coming up to 12:30. Philip Ingram is still with me. Get some of your messages, get your calls as well. Messages coming in about the spring statement. Abby says, I think our MPs could use a reality check. We can expect no growth, she says, until reform comes in. Danny says government borrowing and taxes will keep rising and our standard of living will keep falling under Labour's watch. Sarah says plenty of money for illegal migrants. So Donna says, how about you stop spending so much money on net zero and then you wouldn't need to pillage the working population's wealth to such an extent. Joe says, so it's now official. Own nothing and be happy is the direction of travel Labour had in mind, just without the happy outcome. Yeah, exactly. We won't be happy. Glenn says, if you're British, you're treated like rubbish in your own country, being ruled by liars and cheats. If you're an immigrant, fill your boots. Again, just a lot of anger. And again, I worry about that level of anger towards people coming to our shores. I'm not plenty of anger towards people who come towards our shores illegally, but I just don't want that to spill over into anything else, and that's the concern. Let's go to the phone lines now. 0344 499 1000. Rob is on the line. He's in Bath. And Rob, you want to talk about knife crime. We've got that announcement, haven't we, today about ninja knives are going to be the latest kind of knife where all kids are using apparently against each other, going to be banned from August, but also latest stats on the number of knives that are being pulled in schools.
Yeah. If a guy is going down the street with a bag full of tools, like a screwdriver and a jemmy and a hammer and a pair of pliers and he's a crim, he's going to get done for going equipped.
Well, only if they could prove that he was on his way to a burglary.
Yeah. If he's got no other reason to be carrying.
Yeah, you're not on your way to a job, and we'll take you to your job and talk to your boss, and he was expecting you to bring those tools. Yeah, question mark. Yeah.
Yeah, they would probably do him for going equipped to commit burglary.
You'd need to have a police officer on the street at some point for that to happen. But let's go with that Alice in Wonderland idea. Yeah.
Okay, so stop and search. So if they stop a youth with a machete, surely he should be done for going equipped to commit murder.
Well, yes, I don't know, unless he was planning to hack away at the jungle in, Croydon or Glasgow or Manchester.
Down Oxford Street, I've seen all those, big giant redwoods and stuff like that. but we're too soft.
Well, even when governments, Labour, I remember Labour announcing this stuff. I remember covering that as political editor. The Tories announcing this stuff, and we're doing that on radio shows over the years. And Labour, they all talk a good game on all these things like tackling knife crime. But the vast majority of people, even on their second offence, do not go to prison for carrying a knife. End of.
Yeah, and they talk about the criminal justice system. What justice?
Yeah,
we've just seen a guy who committed murdered a radio broadcaster.
Yes, this John Hunt's family, his two of his daughters and his wife. Yeah,
and he's sentenced to life without parole. Where's the justice?
What would be justice in that case?
Well,
you think death penalty?
Yeah.
I mean, he tried to kill himself with his own crossbow. I'm thinking he's suffering more. Mind you, he's perfectly entitled at any point to try again, isn't he? I mean, without a crossbow this time, I'm not encouraging it. I'm just like, not sure I'd shed a tear. I've got to be honest with you. But, I mean, he's in a wheelchair and he's going to be in prison the rest of his life. I'm hoping he's having a rotten time.
Yeah, so do I. But when we've got, we've got DNA, we've got cameras all over the place.
Yeah, they don't seem to work. You're saying that we've got more proof. If there's proof, we could have the death penalty. I mean, I'm not in favour of the death penalty. I know a lot of our audience is, and a lot of the public is, but I'd rather we kept them behind bars and they had miserable lives. Honestly, that's personally my view. But there we are. As long as they never come out. Coming out in a coffin only. Robin Bath, thank you very much for that. 12:34 is the time. We're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to be talking about, freedom of speech. The small matter of that being in your own workplace, on the streets, in broadcasting, on social media, but also, crucially, in academia, and why the Office for Students is telling universities the next time they fine a university for preventing freedom of speech on campus, it's going to be in the millions. Good for them. We'll talk about that with Debbie Hayton up next. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the Home of Common Sense for me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. 12:37 is the time. Well, let's talk to Debbie Hayton right now. She's a journalist or she, whichever we're using today. Debbie, a journalist and author of Transsexual Apostate, My Journey Back to Reality. Very good afternoon to you, Debbie.
Good afternoon,
Thank you for joining us. I want to talk to you about universities in the first place. We had that fine at the University of Sussex, around the sort of 500 grand mark for the University of Sussex for failing to protect freedom of speech when we had the outrageous threats and bullying of Kathleen Stock for doing nothing other than, you know, just saying facts like trans women aren't women, they are men and can never become women, something which you, if living as a trans person, completely and utterly accept as well. But the University Office for Students that issued that fine, they've said next time round it's going to be a fine in the millions. Do you support that?
Yes, I do, and so it should be, Julia. What we've been seeing, it's authoritarianism in a liberal glove, isn't it? It looks kind, it looks virtuous, but in actual fact, a group of people have been demanding that everybody else says what they think. Yeah. And if these fines bring an end to that, good.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. We've often been told, oh, but these fines will stop freedom of speech. Like, no, it's the exact opposite. These fines are going to ensure this happens. And it is fascinating how we've had so many universities. It's always sort of these academics on the left, and it's often the unions representing the academics as well. They don't stand up for, for instance, a left-wing lesbian woman in the case of Kathleen Stock, standing up for her views and her rights and standing up for women. But then they'll say, but we can't clamp down on freedom of speech because, what about the Jews and when people are spouting anti-Semitism? But no one is saying that people should be allowed to be threatening or abusive as part of their freedom of speech. We're talking about people being allowed to say things that are basic, saying things in a perfectly reasonable fashion, which are fundamental biological facts.
Well, you're quite right. And Kathleen Stock never said anything abusive to anybody. It was the people who were attacking her who were abusive and very abusive.
And it really was. I mean, she was massively intimidating. Crowds of people in balaclavas often as she walked from her home to her office on campus, posters everywhere. I mean, it was incredibly threatening, abusive behaviour. I'm absolutely shocked that the police didn't get involved first, personally.
Well, yes, and at the time, it was actually horrific what we were seeing. And people were actually calling this out. But too many other people either thought it didn't matter or they didn't believe it anyway. And it was happening. It needed to be believed. And it did matter, this way in which people were silenced through intimidation.
And of course, this is a case that came to light an awful lot. But actually, this is happening. And I do a lot of work with the Free Speech Union. They're on the show regularly. I'm a big supporter of them. I'm a member of the union. It is absolutely extraordinary, the scale on which this is happening. It's not just in academia, it's in many other workplaces, but certainly in the public sector and academia, this is off the scale in terms of people basically feeling if they do state something as uncontroversial. It was certainly uncontroversial 10 years ago. It is certainly uncontroversial to the vast majority of the population that trans women are men and not women, but should be treated with respect and kindness, and but in no way should adopt women's rights because they're not women. That somehow is so beyond the pale, these people should be hounded out of their jobs. And that's what they did with Kathleen Stock.
Well, they did, and things are still not right. This is still going on. But 4 or 5 years ago, you were not even allowed to call it out without being harassed. At least now people are allowed to say what's happening and try to explain to other people what's happening, and people do believe it.
I'm always fascinated, actually, because people will say to me, you must get a lot of abuse about this. And I don't. I get a lot of abuse. I've got huge amounts of abuse online on Brexit, get an awful lot over Palestine. I'm a baby-killing, genocidal, whatever. A lot of abuse on net zero, climate denier, and I'm killing the next generation of children, whatever. Very, very little when it comes to the trans issue, although I'm very much aware I've lost a load of work as a result, freelance work, as a result of my views between trans and women's rights and which side I'm on, but not abuse. And I always wonder, it's very noticeable, they tend not to pick on men, who speak out. Graham Linehan is a very unusual example in terms of, and a few other wonderful male souls who've stood up for women's rights. But they've largely gone for people who they think they can bully. And I wonder if just someone like me going, I don't care what you call me, it doesn't work on me, they don't go for me. Have you been under attack? Because you, of course, their worst case scenario, because they can't accuse you of transphobia. You are a man, you know you're a man, you choose to live as if you are a woman, but you know you're not a woman. You don't demand other people, you know, don't know reality, lie about your true gender, your true biological reality. You don't expect them to call you by any preferred pronoun or anything. So you're their worst kind of nightmare, aren't you?
Well, 5 years ago, I was accused of transphobia. 6 years ago, I had this T-shirt made up that says, trans women are men, get over it. And I wore that in 2019. And that caused, should we say, a bit of a fuss.
Oh, wonderful. Good for you. Good for you. Let's also talk about how trans policy affects everything. We know in the NHS we've got a nurse who is amazingly in a tribunal over the fact that she doesn't want to have to get changed with a male doctor who insists on coming in the women's changing rooms when she's at work. We've had issues over doctors who claim to be trans, who are being able to not inform patients, and a nurse who had the most outrageous racist abuse, called the N-word 3 times by a claiming to be trans, convicted paedophile prisoner, shackled to 2 prison guards, who demanded that the nurse call him Mr. and he, Ms. and she, not Mr. and he, and that nurse is the one being disciplined, even though she was the one who was threatened and racially abused. Now the latest madness: a Scottish NHS trust has boasted that its new trans policy will raise awareness of menstruation in men's toilets. NHS Highland has signed off a new blueprint for allowing trans doctors and nurses to self-ID their gender in its hospitals and clinics, and that trans staff should use loos and changing rooms that they feel most appropriate for them, even if it may not be what most women would consider appropriate for them. And they said that so a male-bodied doctor can use a women's changing room or loos, and therefore, of course, they are going to make sure period product bins, i.e. your sanitary towel, your tampon disposal bin, are going to be available in men's loos as well, because this will have an indirect positive benefit of raising awareness of menstruation in men's toilets. I mean, most men who live with women are fully aware of menstruation because they are very aware of the time of the month. I think most of us can agree on that front. This is just properly mad, isn't it?
Well, it is, and we can laugh about the making menstruation an issue in men's toilets. We can laugh about that. But behind it, there's something quite serious. There's lots of people's rights are not being respected.
Yeah.
Yes, say to the trans people, if you don't want to change, go to the toilet with your own sex, we'll try to make alternative arrangements for you. But at the same point, everybody else's rights still need to be protected.
Yeah. And
this policy...
most of these places have a disabled toilet, a cubicle that is private, where people can go, not calling it a disability, just simply say, would you like somewhere private to change because you don't feel comfortable? That's fine. But it doesn't, as you say, it doesn't mean, imposing on the rights of women to get changed only with other women.
Well, yes, and one thing I was told a long time ago is that good policy is good policy for all, and this NHS policy is not good policy.
No. Do you mind me asking what you do when you're in a public place or you have to go somewhere and change your public toilet? What do you choose to do?
I know where the unisex toilets are. I know which cafes have got the single cubicle, and I know where those are. So I've organised that. At work, working in a school, we've got a number of unisex cubicles dotted around the place, so you can find the closest one. Yeah. That's the way we operate, so I don't impinge on anybody.
Yeah, again, isn't it? It's just about everybody. Just again, can we remember everybody's rights? Just finally, I want to ask you about this, because we knew this. We had this expose last week about how data, whether it's crime collection, the NHS, the Census, even in 2021, that had to be overturned by a judicial review. Now conflating sex and gender, often asking people what gender do you believe you are, rather than what is your biological sex. When I was growing up, sex and gender were the same word. I mean, they meant the same thing. Now they mean something very different. One is a reality, one is a feeling, and it means that an awful lot of our stats are frankly utterly meaningless. For instance, male rapists being allowed to register as female as women in the stats. But in the census, we still had the problem where a number of trans people in England and Wales were incorrectly recorded in the latest census. And for the very first time, officials at the ONS have actually admitted this, saying they believe that there were 262,000 trans individuals. We were told it's the first to count trans people. And basically the question was used, is the gender you identify with the same as your sex registered at birth? And the trouble with this was an awful lot of people whose first language was not English didn't really understand that. They were 4 times more likely to say they were trans than anyone who spoke English as a first language. It turns out, I think it was the London Borough of Newham, which has a very, very high non-English born population, amazingly suddenly had the largest number of trans people. They've admitted the question was confusing, people didn't understand it, and we don't have that many trans people, but it's taken them how long to admit that?
Well, it's 3 years, isn't it? And it's let trans people down badly, this has, Julia.
Yeah.
Looking at the census, the biggest need for trans people in the UK is English language classes. It's a nonsense and it doesn't help anybody.
Yeah. Absolutely. It really is utter madness. And again, if you don't ask the right question, you don't get the right stats. Always so good to talk to you. Debbie Hayton, journalist and author of Transsexual Apostate, My Journey Back to Reality. Philip Ingram. Would you like tampons and sanitary towels available in the men's loo? Would it make you more aware of menstruation?
Oh, I've got a better thing. We're going to set up a little business deal. We're going to go to NHS Highland and we're going to sell them endometriosis awareness courses for those that are dealing with trans women.
Yeah, I mean,
we'll make a fortune. Well, a million quid for the course. They'll pay us.
But these people are supposed to be the people dealing with facts. When you're dealing with medical things, with science, you're supposed to be dealing with facts. These people, they break my soul. But we have to talk about it. We have to, again, we yap on it. We have to talk about it because we need to mock it enough to make them stop doing it. Because when people know about it, they can complain about it. Always complain. If you ever ask for your gender, not your sex, on a form, always complain. Anyway, we're going to take a quick break. Up next, we are going to talk to Jake Wallace-Simons about extraordinary protests in Gaza against, you'll never believe it, Hamas. What can we make of that? This is Talk, the Home of Common Sense.
You've got a Chancellor that is not an economist. I don't think she knows much about numbers. She's totally reliant on the Office for Budget Responsibility and their delusional forecast. Nothing short of delusional. On the one hand, they've halved their growth forecast for 2025 from what they forecast just a few months ago, saying that the world has changed and it's all much more difficult geopolitically. And yet, magically, as though maybe they've been eating magic mushrooms, they've suddenly increased their growth forecasts every year thereafter.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the home of common sense, with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer, coming up to 12:52. Philip Ingram is still with me, get his thoughts on what my next guest has to say, and we're delighted to welcome Jake Wallace-Simons to the show. He's the author of the brilliant book, Israelophobia, the newest version of the oldest hatred, and what to do about it. He's also now a columnist on The Telegraph. Very good afternoon to you, Jake.
Good afternoon.
Thanks for joining us. Extraordinary reports coming out of Gaza. Of course, very difficult to get independent information out of Gaza. Everything is very much controlled by the Hamas war machine, the government there, including death figures and the like after Israeli bombing raids. But armed gangs in Gaza have called for an uprising against not Israel, not the IDF, but against Hamas. 2 days of protests so far. What do you make of these reports?
Well, the first observation I'd make is that it's no exaggeration to say there have been more protests against Hamas in Gaza over the last 2 days than in London over the last 17 months, which tells you a lot. And this is on the day when the Manchester Student Union, by the way, has just passed a motion supporting armed resistance, i.e. supporting Hamas, even though its own people in Gaza no longer support Hamas. That just goes to show the moral bankruptcy that we face in this country. But that aside, you know, the Gazans, after 17 months of suffering, and of course years and years of brainwashing and intimidation by their jihadi overlords Hamas, who are basically no different from Islamic State. They stem from the same ideological source in the Muslim Brotherhood and so on. They're finally finding their voices. And it's not they didn't have voices before. I mean, you know, the Gaza is a brainwashed population.
Yeah.
There's a lot of radicalism there, but there have always been people who've objected to Hamas. One or two of them I know personally. I've been in touch with them throughout the war via WhatsApp, on the phone and so forth. In fact, they put me onto this initially, sending me videos of these protests because it wasn't being covered in the BBC.
Yeah.
But they're finally coming out in force. Hamas is so weak that they're finally emboldened to come out and show that they just don't want any more suffering visited upon them by these jihadi maniacs.
Yeah, I mean, it is incredibly brave of them to do this, because we are talking about jihadi maniacs. But this is the thing, we're always told, well, you know, Hamas is different from the civilians. That said, we saw all of these awful videos put out, by the way, by Hamas themselves, of not just of what they did on October the 7th in Israel, but the actual, when victims, you know, old ladies, young women, you know, basically often, you know, already battered and bruised, some appearing to already been raped, you know, gang rape, being paraded through towns in Gaza, and normal, ordinary people in Gaza cheering, whistling, spitting on the victims of that October the 7th attack, which made a lot of us think, like, wake up and go, realise that, you know, Hamas weren't acting completely alone. We know that an awful lot of the hostages have been held in civilian homes, doctors, so-called journalists' homes, supportive of Hamas. So it's a big concern. But then you do wonder, Hamas was originally elected as the power, the governing power in Gaza, but that was, what, 2005? There hasn't been an election since. If they're so sure of their support, you'd think they would have been holding elections regularly.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important not to be naive about this. We're not talking about a strip populated by Liberal Democrats. You know, we're talking about...
They're pretty extreme these days, to be fair, Jake.
Well, that's true. I mean, you know, as much as we might want to send them to Gaza, I'm not sure that they'd fit in that well. But look, you know, in Gaza, it's not a democratic society. None of the Middle East is, apart from Israel. They don't have a democratic tradition. And what they have is a tribal society that's run by clans and warlords, which is one of the reasons why our nation-state borders that we drew haven't really been very successful in the Middle East, because they cross the lines of tribes. And in Gaza, there are these big clans which derive a lot of local tribal support, which have not been very friendly towards Hamas. In fact, last year, there was a plan to try to use them to take over Gaza after Hamas went.
Yeah.
Hamas got wind of this and then beheaded the leader of the Dogmush clan, the biggest clan in Gaza, and many of his followers. And after that, they all pledged loyalty to Hamas. So it works on the basis of power and loyalty.
Yeah, and the willingness to use violence to enforce their views. I mean, that's the thing, isn't it? But we know, figures in the Palestinian Authority would like to be, quite happily oust Hamas and take over themselves. But again, there isn't, as you say, a Lib Dem option. There isn't a moderate option. There's just a least extreme option available.
That's right. I mean, look, I don't want to tar all Gazans with the same brush. I mean, I know one or two of them, and they are decent people, as far as I know. I've been friends with one or two for a long time, since the day I was on the road as a foreign correspondent. But by and large, there's a lot of radicalism. There's a lot of backwards thinking. There is not much in the way of education, modern democracy, democratic values, and Western values like we have.
Well, no, because these are Western values. This thing, everyone always thinks these things are everywhere. They're not. They're Western values. They are unique. They are unique to our culture.
Exactly. There's something called the Wickhamist fallacy, by which people who went to Winchester think that Johnny Foreigner naturally is a good chap deep down, and just allow him to be and he'll become a democratic ally. That's been proven not to be the case over the last 20 or 30, 40 years.
Absolutely.
So we need to be dealing with reality going forward, I think.
Absolutely. Always so good to talk to you, Jake Wallace-Simons. Thank you very much indeed. 12:57 is the time. Just to let you know that Keir Starmer has just been doing a little bit of a press statement alongside President Zelensky in Paris. We've been attending that meeting, the Coalition of the Willing, which Zelensky was saying, please, to the West, no lifting of sanctions on Russia until Russia does actually stop the war. Just a quick reaction to that, Philip Ingram, very briefly.
Well, I think we need to continue to show support, and even stronger support, given the fact that the Americans are wobbling or flip-flopping one way or the other.
Yeah, absolutely. And in terms of the protests, at least, by anti-Hamas forces, these people are brave.
They're very brave, but it shows just how much Hamas has probably lost control in Gaza, and I hope this is the beginning of the end of Hamas's control of Gaza. Because we have to remember, Hamas does not represent the Palestinian people. They had a civil war with Fatah, and the Fatah, who control the West Bank, represent the Palestinian people in all the international organisations.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we can watch and wait, can we not? Of course, developments all going on with the Middle East and, of course, in Ukraine as well. I'm delighted to say right now that Russell Quirk is here. He's in for Ian Collins today. I think he's off on his holes. Lovely to see you.
Yes, Your Highness. How are you?
Very well, Imperial Majesty. Get it right. God, listen, I want my correct preferred pronouns used.
Why do the producers here give me such big shoes to fill? It's not right, is it? It's
Ian
not
Collins
right. Slip me on at 5 in the morning.
It's the 8-inch heels.
There is so much to talk about.
I know.
There really is. Where are you even starting? Yeah.
Well, obviously, spring statement. Obviously, we're going to be talking about all that growth that Rachel Reeves is telling us